My family called my job playing nurse. At my brother's lake party, his son went under the water. I had him breathing before the ambulance arrived. At the hospital, the emergency room chief saw me and stopped. "Doctor, why are you in the waiting room?" My mother's head snapped toward me. She had introduced me as the hired babysitter. "My name is Olivia, and I am 33 years old. I spent my entire life trying to earn the respect of a family that only valued bank account balances and country club memberships." What they did not know was that I was an attending physician at the busiest trauma center in the state. Before I tell you how I brought their entire fake corporate empire crashing down to the ground, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic relatives who treated your actual accomplishments like a joke. The nightmare began on a scorching Saturday in July at my older brother Harrison's summer lake house. I had just finished a grueling 12-hour night shift in the emergency room. My muscles ached and my eyes burned from a severe lack of sleep. I drove straight to the lake property because my mother Patricia had demanded my presence for a mandatory family gathering. She claimed it was a celebration of family unity, but I knew it was just another stage for them to flaunt their supposed wealth. The moment I stepped onto the expansive wooden deck, the glaring sun hit my tired face. Harrison and his wife Jasmine were already entertaining their affluent friends. Jasmine, a striking African-American woman with an impeccable sense of style and a relentlessly sharp tongue, was holding a crystal champagne flute. She looked me up and down with absolute sheer disgust. Before I could even reach for a glass of water, Patricia marched over. She did not say hello. She did not ask how my exhausting medical shift went. Instead, she shoved a massive stack of damp pool towels directly into my chest. "Watch the kids, Olivia." Patricia ordered, her voice intentionally loud enough for the wealthy guests to hear. "The real adults need to discuss our investment portfolios, and we cannot be distracted by children running around." I stood there in my hospital scrubs, the exact same scrubs I wore while saving a car crash victim just 4 hours earlier. Jasmine walked over, her designer heels clicking sharply against the expensive mahogany deck. She let out a dry, condescending laugh. "Honestly, Olivia, you are 33 years old. Are you going to be playing nurse for the rest of your life? Look at you in those cheap pajamas. Harrison just closed a massive corporate merger, and you are still wiping down hospital beds. Maybe if you got a real corporate job, you could afford to buy your own lake house instead of freeloading at ours." Freeloading. The word tasted like bitter ash in my mouth. Harrison's perfect corporate life was built entirely on a foundation of my silent financial support. When he maxed out his credit cards 3 years ago, I paid the massive balance so he would not lose his precious luxury car. When Patricia needed a sudden influx of cash for her cosmetic procedures, she drained the modest college fund my late grandfather had left me. They treated me like a human ATM, draining my resources while mocking the very profession that funded their delusions of grandeur. They assumed I was just a low-level medical assistant, because I never bragged about my promotions, my grueling medical board exams, or my actual salary. I preferred saving lives over comparing tax brackets, but my humility only fueled their arrogance. I gripped the stack of towels tightly, feeling the rough fabric digging into my palms. "Where is Leo?" I asked, referring to Harrison and Jasmine's 4-year-old son. "He is around here somewhere." Jasmine waved her manicured hand vaguely toward the edge of the sprawling property, not even bothering to look away from her phone screen. "Just go keep an eye on him. Harrison's boss is arriving soon, and we need the aesthetic of this party to be absolutely perfect. A tired spinster aunt chasing a toddler around is not exactly the vibe we are going for, but you are all we have got right now. Try to stay out of the professional photographs." Harrison walked over, adjusting his expensive sunglasses with a smug grin. He clapped me on the shoulder, a harsh gesture that felt more like a physical threat than a sibling greeting. "Do not mess this up, Olivia," he warned, his tone dropping to a vicious whisper. "This party is crucial for my firm. Just stay out of sight, hand out the towels, and make sure the kids do not scream while we are networking. I pay a massive mortgage on this mansion while you rent a tiny apartment. Try to learn something from the successful people here today instead of just taking up space." I looked at my brother, taking in his fake tan and his desperate, pathetic need for external validation. I looked at my mother, who was already fawning over a local real estate mogul by the outdoor bar. I looked at Jasmine, who was reapplying her expensive lipstick and ignoring her maternal duties entirely. They were completely consumed by their toxic vanity. None of them had any idea that their carefully constructed house of cards was about to catch fire in the most horrific way imaginable. I did not argue with them. I refused to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. I simply turned my back, carrying the heavy stack of towels toward the water. I was physically exhausted, but my medical instincts were sharper than ever. I scanned the perimeter of the lake looking for my young nephew. The music blared loudly from the outdoor speakers, drowning out the ambient noise of the summer afternoon. The adults laughed and clinked their glasses, completely absorbed in their own self-importance. In a family blinded by their own greed and arrogance, my observational skills were about to become the only thing standing between their superficial party and an absolute irreversible tragedy. I walked closer to the edge of the wooden dock, my eyes scanning the dark, shimmering surface of the water, completely unaware that the next 10 minutes would permanently destroy our family dynamic and expose every single lie they had ever told. The bass from the outdoor speakers vibrated through the wooden planks beneath my sneakers. Laughter erupted from the outdoor kitchen area, where Harrison was loudly bragging to a group of executives about his latest real estate acquisition. Jasmine stood near the infinity pool, adjusting her designer sunglasses, while a hired photographer snapped candid shots of her holding a crystal champagne flute. They were the absolute picture of modern American wealth, carefully curated for their massive social media following. Their followers saw a perfect family. I saw two deeply intoxicated parents who had not looked at their 4-year-old son in over 40 minutes. I walked past a group of women discussing their upcoming trips to Aspen and St. Bart's. None of them acknowledged me. I was just the background help, the invisible sister in cheap medical scrubs, handing out dry towels. My eyes swept the manicured lawn. The bouncy castle was empty. The sandbox was abandoned. A cold knot formed in the pit of my stomach. My emergency room training had hardwired me to constantly scan my environment for anomalies. When you work in trauma, you learn that disaster never announces itself loudly. Disaster is almost always silent. It does not scream for attention. It simply happens in the quiet margins while everyone else is looking the other way. I dropped the stack of towels on a nearby lounge chair and stepped closer to the edge of the private dock. The water in the lake was dark, reflecting the bright afternoon sun in blinding flashes. A stray beach ball bobbed lazily near the wooden pilings. I squinted against the glare, shielding my eyes with my hand. Something was fundamentally wrong. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The water around the dock was notoriously deep, dropping off sharply just a few feet from the shore. Harrison had bragged endlessly about paying a fortune to dredge it, so his wealthy friends could dock their massive speedboats right in the backyard. Then I saw it, a tiny distorted shadow floating just below the shimmering surface. It was faint, warped by the gentle ripples of the water, but the shape was unmistakable. A flash of bright yellow fabric caught the sunlight beneath the dark water. Leo was wearing a bright yellow swimsuit today. My brain stopped registering the loud music. The laughter of the party guests faded into absolute silence. My medical instincts hijacked my physical body entirely. I did not scream for help. I did not waste precious seconds trying to alert Harrison or Jasmine, who were currently clinking their glasses together for another superficial Instagram photo. Every trauma doctor knows that in a drowning scenario, the brain begins to suffer irreversible damage after just 4 minutes without oxygen. I had absolutely no idea how long Leo had been submerged. I only knew that his life was ticking away in vital milliseconds. I broke into a dead sprint across the wooden deck. My sneakers slammed aggressively against the wood, but the party was so incredibly loud that no one even turned their head. I did not slow down as I reached the edge of the dock. I hit the water with tremendous force, diving fully clothed into the freezing lake. The shocking impact of the cold water punched the air completely out of my lungs, but a massive surge of adrenaline flooded my system. The water was murky, filled with silt and lake debris. I kicked my legs furiously, forcing my eyes open despite the stinging dirt and poor visibility. I swam deeper, my hands reaching blindly into the dark water. The pressure built rapidly in my ears. I spotted the yellow fabric again drifting lifelessly toward the dredged bottom of the lake. I propelled myself forward, my lungs burning desperately for oxygen. My fingers brushed against something soft, a small arm. I grabbed hold of Leo and yanked him aggressively toward me. His tiny body was completely limp, terrifyingly heavy with swallowed water. His skin was already taking on a horrifying pale blue tint that I had seen far too many times in the resuscitation bay. I wrapped my arm tightly around his chest, kicking upward with everything I had left in me. The weight of my waterlogged hospital scrubs pulled me down, actively fighting against my ascent. My chest screamed for air, but I refused to let go. I kicked harder, my leg muscles burning fiercely with lactic acid, until we finally broke the surface. I gasped violently for air, coughing up harsh lake water as I treaded water with one arm. I held Leo's head firmly above the surface, securing his fragile airway. He was not breathing. His eyes were rolled back, and his lips were a terrifying shade of purple. The upbeat music on the deck was still blasting a popular summer anthem. I looked toward the shore in sheer disbelief. Jasmine was throwing her head back in laughter, posing perfectly for another photo. Harrison was pouring expensive tequila into a corporate guest's glass. Not a single person had noticed that the heir to their fake corporate kingdom was currently dying in my arms. "Help!" I screamed at the top of my lungs, but my voice was completely swallowed by the heavy thumping bass of the music. I swam furiously toward the wooden dock, dragging my nephew's lifeless body through the water. I reached the wooden pilings and hoisted Leo up onto the rough planks with a massive surge of adrenaline. I scrambled up immediately after him, my wet scrubs clinging heavily to my skin, my knees scraping violently against the wood, leaving streaks of blood on the dock. I knelt beside the 4-year-old boy. He was completely unresponsive. No chest rise, no pulse. I placed my ear near his mouth. Absolute silence. The situation was catastrophic. I placed my 2 fingers against his carotid artery, pressing into his small, cold neck. Nothing. The heart had completely stopped. At that exact moment, a woman standing near the outdoor bar finally turned her head toward the water. She dropped her wine glass. The expensive crystal shattered loudly against the stone patio. She let out a blood-curdling scream that finally pierced right through the loud music. The music abruptly cut off. The entire party froze in place. Harrison turned around, his expensive tequila bottle slipping from his hands and crashing to the floor. Jasmine pulled down her designer sunglasses, her flawless face contorting in sheer, unadulterated horror as she realized the blue, lifeless body lying on the wet dock belonged to her son. I did not look at them. I did not care about their sudden horror or their performative panic. My entire world narrowed down to the small, unmoving chest in front of me. I interlocked my fingers, locked my elbows, and positioned the heel of my hands perfectly over the lower half of Leo's sternum. The golden child of this toxic family was clinically dead, and I was the only person on this entire property equipped to bring him back from the other side. I pressed down hard, beginning the brutal, physical rhythm of high-quality chest compressions, fully prepared to wage a violent war against death itself. 1, 2, 3, 4. I counted out loud, locking my shoulders and using my entire upper body weight to drive the heel of my hand deep into Leo's sternum. Drowning resuscitation on a pediatric patient is a gruesome mechanical process. The human chest is a cage of bone and cartilage, and effective compressions require you to press down hard enough to manually squeeze the heart against the spine. On the third compression, I felt the sickening, unmistakable crunch of cartilage separating from bone. It is a sound that haunts every medical professional, but it means you are doing it right. I did not flinch. I kept my rhythm steady, pushing the stagnant blood through his tiny, failing heart, forcing his circulatory system to manually restart and deliver whatever residual oxygen was left to his dying brain. The sheer violence of proper medical resuscitation is jarring to anyone outside the emergency room. A shadow fell over me. A pair of manicured hands grabbed my wet shoulder and yanked me backward with staggering force. "Get off him!" Jasmine shrieked, her voice cracking with pure, unadulterated hysteria. She dug her acrylic nails deep into my skin, attempting to drag me away from her son. "You are hurting him. You are breaking his bones. Stop it right now." Patricia was right behind her, screaming in a high pitch that pierced my eardrums. "Olivia, what is wrong with you? Get away from my grandson. You are killing him." I lost my balance for a fraction of a second, my hands slipping off Leo's chest. That was a lethal interruption. Every single second off the chest dramatically drops the perfusion pressure to the brain, essentially sealing a patient's fate. I felt a surge of absolute blinding rage. They were literally aiding death out of sheer ignorance and vanity. I planted my knees firmly on the wet wood, twisted my torso, and threw my left elbow backward with maximum deliberate force. My elbow connected solidly with Jasmine's ribs. The impact knocked the wind completely out of her. She stumbled backward, gasping violently for air, her expensive summer dress slipping on the bloody wet dock. She fell hard against a lounge chair, clutching her side in shock. Patricia lunged forward, raising her hands to strike me. I shot my hand up, pointing a single rigid finger directly at her face. My voice tore from my throat with the absolute authority of an attending trauma physician commanding a chaotic resuscitation bay. "If you touch me again, he dies right here on this dock. Back the hell up and shut your mouth." Patricia froze in her tracks, her eyes wide with shock and indignation. I immediately snapped my hands back onto Leo's chest and resumed the compressions. 15, 16, 17. I locked eyes with Harrison, who was standing frozen 10 feet away, staring blankly at the pool of water forming around his dying son. His expensive linen shirt was pristine. He had not taken a single step to help. "Harrison!" I roared, my voice cutting through his paralyzed stupor. "Pull your phone out of your pocket. Dial 911. Tell them we have a pediatric drowning code, blue CPR in progress. Put it on speaker and throw it on the ground next to me. Do it right now." Harrison fumbled wildly, his hands shaking so violently he dropped his latest smartphone twice before finally dialing the numbers. The dispatcher's voice echoed through the speaker. I reached 30 compressions. I pinched Leo's small nose shut, tilted his chin back to open his airway, and clamped my mouth tightly over his. I delivered 2 steady rescue breaths, watching his pale chest rise and fall artificially. The foul taste of lake water, silt, and vomit coated my tongue. I did not care. I snapped my hands back to his sternum and started compressing again. The psychological environment around me was sheer madness. The wealthy party guests had formed a horrified, silent circle around us. Nobody dared to intervene after seeing me physically strike Jasmine. Jasmine was sobbing hysterically on the ground, screaming to anyone who would listen that she was going to have me arrested for felony assault. Patricia was pacing frantically, wringing her hands and crying to a real estate mogul about how this terrible accident would completely ruin the aesthetic of the afternoon. Their complete lack of parental instinct was staggering. Even as their child hovered on the brink of permanent brain death, their primary concern remained their own comfort, legal retaliation, and social image. "Come on, Leo," I muttered through gritted teeth, ignoring the stinging pain in my scraped knees and the burning exhaustion radiating through my shoulders. "Stay with me. Do not let go." On the 84th compression, my hands felt a sudden violent spasm deep within his chest cavity. I quickly pulled my hands back. Leo's tiny body convulsed. His back arched off the wooden dock, and he suddenly vomited a massive volume of dark, murky lake water directly onto my wet scrubs. I instantly rolled him onto his side into the recovery position, sweeping his mouth with my finger to clear the obstructed airway. He let out a weak, agonizing gasp, followed by a raw, guttural cry that sounded like tearing sandpaper. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard in my entire life. His skin was still terrifyingly cold and mottled, but the dark purple hue on his lips was slowly giving way to a faint, vital pink. His lungs were fighting fiercely to expand, pulling in real, unassisted oxygen from the humid summer air. I kept him securely on his side, rubbing his back vigorously to stimulate blood flow, shielding his shivering body with my own exhausted frame. The heavy, piercing wail of ambulance sirens cut through the air, growing rapidly louder as they turned into the private gated community. The paramedics were arriving. I had won the war. I had pulled him back from the absolute brink. But the battle was far from over. As I knelt there on the blood-stained dock, exhausted and soaked in lake water, I heard Patricia speaking rapidly to Harrison in a hushed, frantic whisper. I looked up. She was already straightening her designer dress, her face hardening into a mask of pure, calculated malice. She was no longer looking at Leo. She was looking directly at me, her eyes narrowing, as she prepared to completely rewrite the narrative of everything that had just happened. The blaring sirens grew deafening as the paramedics rushed the wooden dock. Two emergency medical technicians sprinted past Patricia and Jasmine, dropping their heavy trauma bags right beside me. I quickly rattled off Leo's vital statistics, the estimated time of submersion, and his current respiratory rate, using precise clinical terminology. The lead paramedic gave me a sharp nod of professional recognition before scooping the shivering 4-year-old onto a transport stretcher. Jasmine suddenly burst into a theatrical display of maternal grief, pushing past me to grab the stretcher rails. She wailed loudly for the entire neighborhood to hear, screaming that she could not lose her precious baby. Harrison grabbed his luxury car keys, ordering Patricia to get in the passenger seat. They did not offer me a ride. They did not offer me a dry towel. They left me standing on the blood-stained dock, shivering in my soaking wet scrubs, entirely abandoned at the scene of the trauma. I walked to my own compact sedan, my sneakers squishing with every step, and gripped the steering wheel with freezing hands. I pulled out of the gated community and drove straight toward the one place I knew better than my own apartment. The emergency room at Metropolitan General Hospital. My territory. I parked in the designated physician lot, bypassing the public visitor garage entirely. My wet scrubs clung to my skin, and dried lake silt coated my arms, but my posture was rigid with pure adrenaline. I swiped my keycard at the secure rear entrance, actively avoiding the ambulance bay where Leo had just been unloaded. I needed to see exactly how my toxic family was going to play this situation. I walked through the familiar staff corridors and slipped quietly into the chaotic public waiting room from an inconspicuous side door. The emergency room waiting area was a massive, brightly lit cavern, packed with coughing patients, crying children, and exhausted families. The smell of harsh antiseptic and stale coffee filled the air. Right in the center of the room, standing aggressively at the primary triage desk, were Harrison, Jasmine, and Patricia. They were causing an absolute spectacle. Jasmine was leaning heavily against the high counter, sobbing uncontrollably into her hands. Harrison was pacing back and forth, angrily demanding to speak to the hospital administrator because his son was a very important patient. Patricia stood directly in front of the triage glass, slamming her palm against the counter to get the attention of the triage nurse. The nurse on duty was Carla, a veteran trauma nurse with 20 years of gritty experience. Carla had stood shoulder to shoulder with me during countless code blues. She knew my face, my voice, and my medical license number by heart. But from her angle behind the plexiglass, she had not yet spotted me standing quietly in the shadows near the vending machines. "We need updates right now!" Patricia shrieked at Carla, her voice echoing sharply off the linoleum walls. My grandson was just brought in from a drowning incident at our private lake estate. He almost died because of the absolute sheer negligence of the help. Carla maintained her stoic professional expression, typing rapidly into the hospital database. "I understand you are distressed, ma'am. We are evaluating the child in Trauma Bay 1 right now. Can you tell me exactly what happened at the scene so I can update the attending physician?" Patricia turned around, dramatically scanning the waiting room to ensure she had a captive audience. Her eyes locked onto me, standing by the far wall. A vicious, triumphant smirk flashed across her face. She raised her hand and pointed her index finger directly at my chest. Everyone in the waiting area turned their heads to look at me. "There she is!" Patricia yelled, projecting her voice so every single stranger in the room could hear her venom. "That woman right there. We hired her to babysit the children during our corporate gathering. We paid her to do one simple job, and she completely abandoned her post. She let my precious grandson fall into the lake while she was probably looking at her phone. She is reckless, incompetent, and she should be arrested for child endangerment." Jasmine immediately backed up the vicious lie. She spun around, pointing a manicured finger at me while fake tears streamed down her face. "She assaulted me." Jasmine cried loudly, playing the perfect victim. When I tried to save my own, that babysitter shoved me to the ground. She was violently crushing my baby's chest. I demand that you call the police immediately. She is a danger to society." Harrison stepped forward, crossing his arms, looking at me with pure, unadulterated disdain. "We want to file a formal complaint with this hospital right now," Harrison demanded. "If that woman works for some kind of local childcare agency, we want her fired, blacklisted, and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. She is completely unhinged." I stood completely still. I did not flinch. I did not open my mouth to defend myself against the outrageous slander. My wet scrubs dripped lake water onto the polished hospital floor. My knees were bruised and bloody from the brutal compressions on the wooden dock. To the dozens of strangers sitting in the plastic waiting room chairs, I looked exactly like the pathetic, negligent babysitter my family was loudly describing. I let the heavy, suffocating silence hang in the air, allowing them to dig their grave deeper with every single word. Carla looked up from her computer screen. She followed Patricia's pointing finger across the crowded waiting room. When Carla's eyes finally landed on me, her fingers completely stopped typing. Her jaw dropped slightly. A look of profound confusion washed over her face. She looked at Patricia, then back at me, her brain struggling to process the sheer absurdity of the accusation. I slowly raised my right hand, catching Carla's eye. I gave her a very subtle, deliberate shake of my head. I held my index finger up slightly, signaling her to stand down and let the scene play out. Carla instantly understood the assignment. She closed her mouth, clamped her lips together, and simply stared at my family, as if they had just lost their minds. Two hospital security guardsmen, who greeted me every single morning when I arrived for my shift, started walking toward the loud commotion. Patricia saw them approaching and immediately puffed out her chest, emboldened by their arrival. "Yes, officers," Patricia commanded, waving them over arrogantly. "Arrest that woman. She is the negligent babysitter who nearly killed my grandson. Escort her off the premises immediately before she hurts anyone else." The lead security guard, a burly man named Dave, looked directly at me. I gave him the same silent command. I crossed my arms over my chest and stood my ground. Dave stopped dead in his tracks. He looked at Harrison, then at Jasmine, then back at me. He crossed his massive arms and simply stood perfectly still, forming a human barricade without taking a single step toward me. My family was absolutely reveling in their public performance. They thought they had successfully ruined my life. They believed they had established the perfect legal narrative to shield themselves from any liability regarding their drunken negligence at the lake. They were so blinded by their own arrogance that they failed to notice the bizarre reactions of the hospital staff. They did not notice that the triage nurse was staring at them with absolute contempt. They did not notice that the armed security guards were treating me with silent, unwavering respect. I watched Patricia smugly adjust her designer handbag, entirely convinced she had won the war. She was completely unaware that she had just walked directly into my fortress. I owned this emergency room. I had saved hundreds of lives within these exact walls. The very people she was trying to use to destroy me were my colleagues, my team, and my fiercely loyal work family. I did not need to scream or defend myself. I just waited patiently in the damp, freezing silence, knowing that the ultimate reckoning was only seconds away. The automatic sliding doors separating the main trauma bay from the public waiting area remained firmly shut. The glaring fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the faces of my furious relatives. Patricia had her arms crossed, her chin tilted upward in an arrogant display of false victory. She truly believed her loud, theatrical accusations had successfully painted me as a criminal. Jasmine was actively trying to force out a few more artificial tears, dabbing at her perfectly contoured cheeks, with a tissue playing the role of the traumatized mother for the growing audience of strangers. Harrison was tapping his designer shoe against the linoleum, probably calculating how quickly he could file a lawsuit against me to cover his tracks. The triage nurse. Carla continued to stare at them with an expression of barely contained disgust. The two security guards held their positions, acting as a silent, impenetrable wall between my family and me. The sheer entitlement radiating from my brother and his wife was suffocating. They were demanding immediate service, completely oblivious to the fact that emergency medicine operates on triage, not tax brackets. In their warped reality, money and loud complaints could buy them instant access and immunity from consequence. They had no idea that their entire performance was about to crash headfirst into a brick wall of medical hierarchy. A sharp mechanical buzz echoed through the waiting room. The heavy frosted glass doors of the restricted trauma bay slid open with a violent swoosh. The noise instantly commanded the attention of everyone in the room. Striding through those doors was Dr. Eris Thorne. Dr. Thorne was the chief of emergency medicine. He was a towering, broad-shouldered man with silver hair, piercing gray eyes, and a reputation for absolute, unapologetic brilliance. He commanded respect not just through his title, but through his sheer imposing presence. He was wearing his long white coat, a stethoscope draped around his neck, and a digital chart gripped tightly in his right hand. Patricia spotted the long white coat and immediately went into action. She recognized authority and instinctively knew how to play to it. She pushed past a coughing patient, shoved her way to the front of the triage desk, and threw her hands up in a desperate, pleading gesture. "Oh, doctor, thank goodness you are here!" Patricia wailed, her voice trembling with manufactured agony. "I am the grandmother. Please tell me my precious Leo is going to survive the horrific negligence of that woman over there. We want her arrested immediately. She let him drown." Dr. Thorne did not slow his pace. He did not extend a hand to comfort her. He did not even look at Patricia. He walked right past her outstretched arms, as if she were completely invisible. His heavy footsteps echoed across the waiting room floor, cutting a straight path directly toward the vending machines, toward me. The entire waiting room fell dead silent. You could hear a pin drop on the linoleum. Patricia spun around, her mouth hanging open in sheer confusion, watching the chief of emergency medicine march directly toward the soaking wet, blood-stained woman she had just publicly labeled a negligent babysitter. Dr. Thorne stopped exactly 2 feet in front of me. He looked at my dripping, ruined scrubs. He looked at the scraped, bleeding skin on my knees. He looked at the exhaustion etched deep into my face. He did not see a failure. He saw a colleague who had just fought a brutal war against death. He crossed his arms, his booming voice shattering the absolute silence of the room. "Dr. Olivia, why on earth are you sitting out here in the public waiting room?" The word doctor dropped like a live grenade. The impact was instantaneous and devastating. I watched the color completely drain from Patricia's face in a matter of seconds. Her jaw practically unhinged, hanging slack, as her brain violently short-circuited. She blinked rapidly, staring at Dr. Thorne, then at me, then back at Dr. Thorne, utterly incapable of processing the reality unfolding in front of her. Jasmine gasped, taking a literal physical step backward, as if she had been slapped. Her fake tears vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. Harrison froze, his eyes bulging out of his head, his expensive loafers glued to the floor. "Doctor." Harrison mouthed the words silently, unable to force any actual sound past his vocal cords. The title shattered their entire illusion. For over a decade they had mocked my career. They had laughed at my cheap scrubs. They had confidently told their wealthy friends that I was just a low-level assistant, a failure who changed bedpans for a living. They had convinced themselves of my inferiority so deeply that hearing the chief of medicine address me with professional reverence literally broke their minds. I stood up slowly from the plastic waiting room chair. The damp fabric of my scrubs clung to my skin, but my posture was entirely rigid, radiating the authority I had earned through blood sweat and a decade of grueling medical training. I did not look at my family. I maintained unbroken eye contact with my commanding officer. "I was technically off the clock, Dr. Thorne." I replied, my voice steady, professional, and entirely devoid of emotion. "I pulled the patient from a residential lake approximately 30 minutes ago. Estimated submersion time was less than 3 minutes. I initiated immediate CPR on the dock. Return of spontaneous circulation was achieved after approximately 2 minutes of high-quality chest compressions and rescue breaths. The patient vomited lake water and showed spontaneous respiratory effort before EMS arrival." Dr. Thorne nodded sharply, absorbing the clinical handover with absolute professional respect. "Excellent work, doctor," he stated loudly, ensuring his voice carried to every single corner of the room. "Your rapid response and immediate intervention are the only reasons that child is currently breathing on his own. We have him stabilized in Trauma Bay 1. He is intubated for airway protection, and we are running a full trauma panel, but his vitals are strong. You saved his life. You saved his life. The words hung heavily in the air, completely annihilating Patricia and Jasmine's vicious narrative. The strangers in the waiting room, who had been glaring at me just minutes earlier, now stared at my family with open, burning disgust. The triage nurse Carla crossed her arms behind the plexiglass, a slow, deeply satisfied smile spreading across her face. The security guards straightened their postures, glaring sternly at Harrison. Patricia finally found her voice, though it emerged as a pathetic, trembling squeak. Olivia. What is he talking about? You are not a doctor. You work at a clinic. You hand out towels. I finally turned my head to look at my mother. I looked at the sheer panic twisting her features. I looked at Jasmine, who was shaking violently, suddenly realizing the massive legal and social peril she had just stepped into. I looked at Harrison, whose fake corporate bravado had evaporated completely. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream. I spoke with the icy surgical precision of a trauma attending addressing a hostile bystander. I am an attending trauma physician at this hospital, Patricia. I have been for 3 years. Now, if you will excuse me, I need to go change out of these wet scrubs. Dr. Thorne will update you on your son's condition, assuming Child Protective Services allows you to see him. I turned my back on their horrified, paralyzed faces and walked through the restricted double doors, leaving them trapped in the nightmare of their own making. The heavy frosted glass doors clicked shut behind me, sealing me inside the sterile sanctuary of the emergency department. I leaned against the cold cinder block wall for a fraction of a second, letting out a heavy breath. I felt like I had been holding since I jumped off that wooden dock. But the silence did not last. Even through 2 inches of reinforced safety glass, I could hear the absolute meltdown erupting in the waiting room. My family was not experiencing relief that Leo was alive. They were experiencing the terrifying, violent collapse of their own fragile egos. I walked briskly to the attending physician's locker room, peeling off my soaked lake water-ruined scrubs. As I pulled on a fresh, crisp pair of navy blue hospital scrubs and clipped my heavy identification badge to my collar, my pager vibrated aggressively. It was a direct message from Carla at the triage desk. You need to hear this. They are completely losing their minds. I stepped back out into the main corridor, pausing just out of sight behind the security monitors that displayed the live video feed of the public waiting area. I needed to know exactly what kind of legal warfare my brother was actively planning. Jasmine was pacing furiously in tight circles, her expensive designer heels striking the linoleum floor like weapons. She pointed a manicured finger directly at Dr. Thorne, completely abandoning any pretense of being a grieving, traumatized mother. How much did she pay you? Jasmine shrieked, her voice cracking with pure, unhinged hysteria. How much money did Olivia transfer to your bank account to come out here and put on this ridiculous performance? She is not a real doctor. She has 0 money. She wears cheap clothes and drives a terrible car. You are all part of some sick, twisted prank to embarrass us in public. Dr. Thorne stood perfectly still, his broad shoulders squared like a brick wall. He looked at Jasmine as if she were a fascinating, deeply disturbed psychological case study. Madam, tampering with a medical professional's credentials is a federal offense. Dr. Olivia has been a top-tier trauma surgeon here for 3 years. She graduated at the absolute top of her medical class. She just saved your son from clinical death. I highly suggest you lower your voice and show some basic respect before I have security remove you from my hospital. Patricia stepped forward, her face flushed a dark, furious crimson. Her brain simply refused to accept the reality that the daughter she had mocked for over a decade was actually a highly respected physician. Do not lie to us, Patricia yelled, her hands shaking violently. She is a glorified medical assistant. She changes bedpans for a living. She is just a bitter, jealous woman trying to steal the spotlight from my son's massive corporate success. You need to check your own employment records, doctor, because that girl is a total fraud. That was when Harrison finally snapped out of his paralyzed stupor. His fake corporate bravado returned in full force, fueled entirely by panic and the desperate need to protect his fragile wealth. He marched right up to Dr. Thorne, pulling his shoulders back in a pathetic attempt to look physically intimidating. I am going to sue this entire hospital into the ground. Harrison roared, his face mere inches from the ER chief. And I'm going to sue that psychotic sister of mine for aggravated child abuse. Harrison slammed his fist onto the triage counter, causing Carla to jump slightly behind the plexiglass. I saw what she did on that dock. Harrison continued, his voice dripping with pure venom. I saw her violently crushing my son's chest. She was using her entire body weight to break his bones. She deliberately assaulted a 4-year-old child under the guise of medical treatment. I want the police called right now. I want her arrested for felony assault and child endangerment. She tried to murder my son because she is jealous of our lifestyle. Dr. Thorne did not even blink. He crossed his arms over his white coat, his gaze turning to absolute ice. What you saw was high-quality cardiopulmonary resuscitation. When a child has no pulse, the only way to manually pump the heart is to apply deep, forceful compressions to the sternum. Rib fractures and cartilage separation are standard expected complications of life-saving CPR. Those bruises on your son's chest are the exact reason he currently has oxygen flowing to his brain. Your sister broke his ribs to save his life while you stood by and watched him die. Harrison refused to listen to basic medical science. He waved his hand dismissively, his eyes wild with sheer desperation. That is a convenient excuse for a violent assault. Harrison spat back. I am a high-level corporate executive. I have the best defense attorneys in the state on retainer. I am going to have her medical license permanently revoked. I will drag her name through the mud, and I will take every single penny she has ever earned in a civil lawsuit. She is not going to get away with touching my son. Jasmine immediately nodded in agreement, wiping away her fake tears and replacing them with a look of pure calculated malice. Exactly. She assaulted me too. She violently elbowed me in the ribs when I tried to pull her off my baby. We have dozens of wealthy, influential friends at that party who saw the whole thing. They will all testify against her in court. We will absolutely destroy her career. Standing behind the security monitors, I listened to every single word. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach, not out of fear, but out of sheer disbelief. My family was entirely incapable of experiencing gratitude. They had just been handed their son back from the brink of absolute death, and their immediate instinctual response was to destroy the person who saved him. They were terrified. They knew they had been heavily intoxicated and completely negligent at the lake. They needed a scapegoat to deflect the blame, and they had collectively decided to use me. They thought their corporate lawyers and country club friends could intimidate me. They thought I was still the quiet, submissive sister who would simply bow her head and take their abuse. They had no idea that emergency room doctors operate in a completely different world. We deal with hostile, violent, and unhinged people every single day. I did not fear their empty legal threats. I knew the law perfectly. But more importantly, my hospital kept meticulous records. Every drop of blood and every single second of security footage was about to become my ultimate weapon. I took a deep breath, smoothing down the front of my clean scrubs. The time for staying silent was officially over. I stepped out from behind the security monitors and walked directly back into the chaotic waiting room. The time for hiding behind the scenes was officially over. Dr. Thorne was already moving toward the administration desk, picking up the heavy red telephone designated for emergency external communications. My family had absolutely no idea how the modern American medical system operated. They thought their wealth and loud complaints could dictate hospital policy. They were entirely ignorant of the fact that under strict state and federal laws, every single medical professional in that emergency room was a mandatory reporter. When a 4-year-old child arrives nearly dead from a drowning incident, occurring at a party filled with heavily intoxicated adults, the hospital does not ask for permission to investigate. The hospital calls the authorities immediately. Less than 15 minutes later, the heavy automatic doors of the emergency room slid open. 2 uniformed city police officers walked in, flanking a stern, sharp-looking woman, clutching a thick leather binder. Her identification badge read, Brenda Caldwell, Department of Child Protective Services. The entire atmosphere in the waiting room instantly shifted from noisy agitation to a suffocating, terrifying tension. CPS does not care about the balance of your investment portfolio. They do not care about your luxury vehicles or your exclusive gated community. They possess the absolute legal authority to remove a child from their parents' custody on the spot if they suspect active negligence or abuse. Brenda Caldwell marched directly up to the triage desk. She flashed her credentials at Carla, who immediately pointed toward the corner where my family was huddled. As the CPS agent and the armed officers approached them, the sheer arrogance radiating from Harrison and Jasmine evaporated into thin air. Their country club bravado was instantly replaced by raw, unadulterated panic. Jasmine physically recoiled, grabbing Harrison's arm so tightly her knuckles turned white. Patricia stopped her frantic pacing, her face draining of whatever color she had left. Harrison attempted to step forward and intercept the agent using his fake corporate charm. "Officer, there is a massive misunderstanding here." Harrison stammered, his voice lacking its usual commanding tone. "I am a senior executive. We live in a highly secure residential community. This was just a minor accident by the lake, and we are handling it privately with our own legal team. You do not need to be involved in our family matters." Brenda Caldwell did not even blink. She opened her leather binder and clicked her pen. "Sir, your son was admitted to this trauma center with severe hypoxia and required manual resuscitation after being submerged in water. This is not a private family matter. This is an active state investigation into child endangerment. We will be interviewing every single person involved separately and under oath starting right now." The word oath hit my family like a physical blow to the stomach. They realized simultaneously that lying to a state investigator carrying a badge was a severe criminal offense. They also realized that if they admitted the truth that they were taking tequila shots and posing for social media photos while their 4-year-old son sank to the bottom of the lake, they would lose custody of Leo before midnight. They were trapped in a horrifying legal nightmare of their own creation. Panic breeds desperation, and desperate people do not confess. They attack. Jasmine completely lost her mind. She threw her hands in the air and let out a piercing, hysterical sob, pointing her shaking finger directly at me as I stood quietly near the vending machines. It was her. Jasmine screamed, tears streaming down her face in a desperate, Oscar-worthy performance. We did not neglect our baby. We were watching him the entire time. Olivia pushed him. She shoved my innocent baby off the wooden dock and into the deep water. The entire emergency room went dead silent again. The police officers immediately turned their gaze toward me, their hands instinctively moving closer to their utility belts. Brenda Caldwell frowned, her pen hovering over her notepad. "Are you officially stating that this woman intentionally pushed your son into the lake?" Caldwell asked, her voice dangerously calm, ensuring Jasmine understood the gravity of the accusation. "Yes," Jasmine shrieked, doubling down on the catastrophic lie. "She is a complete psychopath. She is wildly jealous of our wealth and our perfect marriage. She wanted to play the hero. She shoved Leo into the freezing water just so she could dive in and pretend to save him. She wanted to prove what a great doctor she is, because her own family knows she is a total failure. She used my baby as a medical prop." Patricia immediately jumped in, sensing the opportunity to completely shift the blame and save their elite social reputation. "It is true, officer." Patricia cried loudly, clutching her designer handbag against her chest. "I saw the whole thing with my own 2 eyes." Olivia arrived at the party uninvited and extremely agitated. She marched right down to the water and pushed the poor boy. Then she violently attacked me and my daughter-in-law when we tried to intervene and rescue him. "She is a danger to society and you need to lock her up immediately." Harrison swallowed hard. He looked at me, his eyes wide with sheer terror. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was legally framing me for attempted murder to save his own skin and protect his corporate career. "Yes," Harrison lied, his voice shaking. "My mother and my wife are telling the truth. My sister is deeply disturbed. She tried to murder my son." I stood perfectly still against the cinder block wall. I did not gasp. I did not scream that they were lying. I did not beg the police officers to believe me. I simply watched them dig a legal grave so incredibly deep that they would never, ever climb out of it. By providing a false statement to a state investigator regarding a felony crime, they had just crossed the line from civil negligence straight into criminal perjury. Brenda Caldwell turned away from my family and walked directly toward me, flanked by the 2 police officers. Her expression was stern and highly suspicious. Doctor, you are being accused of intentional child endangerment and attempted homicide, Caldwell stated coldly. You need to come with us to an interrogation room right now. Anything you say is going to be recorded for the official state investigation. I looked the CPS agent right in the eye. I am completely willing to cooperate with your investigation, Agent Caldwell. I replied, my voice completely devoid of panic. I will provide a full sworn statement detailing exactly how I pulled that child from the bottom of the lake while his parents were heavily intoxicated. But before we step into that room, I highly suggest you formally request the hospital administration to secure all security footage and run a full toxicology screen on the parents immediately. I glanced over Caldwell's shoulder, locking eyes with Harrison. He had just signed his own death warrant, and I was going to be the one to deliver the execution. I turned away from Harrison's terrified face and walked calmly down the sterile hallway toward the hospital administrative wing, flanked by the two armed police officers and CPS agent Brenda Caldwell. They expected me to be hysterical. They expected me to cry, to beg for my career, or to frantically deny the wild accusations my family had just hurled at me. Instead, I maintained the absolute cold composure of a trauma surgeon. When we reached the small, windowless interrogation room typically used for family consultations, I took a seat at the metal table. Caldwell opened her leather binder, clicked her pen, and prepared to record my official statement. I looked directly into her eyes and delivered my first legal strike. I am not saying a single word on the record until my attorney is sitting in that empty chair next to me, I stated evenly. Furthermore, I formally request that you issue an immediate preservation order for the cloud storage data linked to the residential security system at my brother's lake estate. Caldwell blinked slightly, caught off guard by my complete lack of panic and my immediate pivot to digital evidence. She nodded slowly, recognizing that she was not dealing with a typical suspect. You have the right to legal counsel, Doctor, she replied, closing her binder. But if you are innocent, withholding a statement only delays the investigation. I am not withholding anything, Agent Caldwell. I am ensuring that the evidence is completely locked down before the people in your waiting room realize they left a massive digital footprint. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed a number I kept saved for absolute emergencies. I did not call a standard family lawyer. I called Vincent Cole. Vincent was a highly aggressive, notoriously ruthless criminal defense attorney who represented several high-profile medical professionals in the city. He specialized in destroying fraudulent malpractice claims and false accusations. When I quickly outlined the situation, including the felony perjury my family had just committed to a state investigator, Vincent told me he would be at the hospital in 12 minutes. While we waited, my mind calculated the precise trap I was setting for my family. Harrison was a man entirely obsessed with his own status and material possessions. When he purchased that massive lake house, he spent over $50,000 installing a state-of-the-art panoramic smart security system. He bragged endlessly about the ultra-high-definition cameras, the motion sensors, and the automatic cloud backup system that recorded every single inch of his property 24 hours a day. He installed it to monitor his expensive boats and to show off to his wealthy corporate friends. He was so incredibly arrogant and so blinded by his panic in the emergency room that he had completely forgotten about his own surveillance system. Vincent Cole walked into the interrogation room exactly 12 minutes later. He wore a sharp, tailored suit and carried a sleek briefcase radiating an aura of absolute legal destruction. I briefed him on the clinical details of the drowning, the subsequent resuscitation, and the vicious lies Patricia, Jasmine, and Harrison had just spun to the authorities. Vincent did not waste a single second. He immediately turned to Agent Caldwell and the police officers. My client will not be providing a verbal defense, because a verbal defense is entirely unnecessary, Vincent stated with lethal authority. My client's brother Harrison operates a comprehensive multi-camera surveillance system at the exact location of the incident. We are filing an emergency subpoena right now to seize the cloud storage footage from the service provider before Harrison attempts to delete the evidence. We demand that the police secure that digital data immediately. The police officers exchanged a sharp look. An emergency subpoena for video evidence in an attempted homicide and child endangerment investigation was a top priority. The lead officer immediately stepped out into the hallway to contact a local judge and the cybercrimes unit. My family was sitting just 100 feet away, in the public waiting room, entirely clueless that a legal team was currently extracting the master key to their destruction directly from a remote server. It took exactly 2 hours for the cyber unit to secure the preservation order, bypass Harrison's account, and pull the high-definition video files directly from the security company's cloud server. During those 2 hours, my family continued their pathetic performance in the waiting room, crying fake tears and demanding that I be handcuffed and hauled away to jail. They were completely unaware that the guillotine was already dropping. Agent Caldwell, the two police officers. Vincent and I gathered around a large monitor in the hospital administration office. A cyber technician pulled up the raw, unedited footage from the camera, positioned directly above the wooden dock. The video quality was crystal clear, capturing the entire lakefront property in stunning 4K resolution. Vincent pressed play. The digital timestamp showed the exact minute the party was in full swing. The footage displayed Harrison and Jasmine standing near the outdoor bar. They were not watching their son. They were not anywhere near the water. The video clearly showed Jasmine holding a tequila bottle, pouring shots for Harrison and another corporate guest. They were throwing their heads back in laughter, their backs completely turned away from the lake. The screen then captured a tiny splash near the edge of the dock as Leo slipped beneath the surface. For 4 agonizing, terrifying minutes on the digital timestamp, the parents continued to drink and pose for photographs. Then my figure darted onto the screen. The high-definition camera perfectly captured my dead sprint across the wooden deck. It captured me diving fully clothed into the freezing water. It captured the grueling, desperate moments as I dragged the lifeless blue body of my nephew onto the planks. The room remained dead silent as the video continued to play. The authorities watched me initiate brutal, rapid chest compressions. Then came the absolute nail in the coffin. The camera perfectly recorded Jasmine and Patricia running over and violently assaulting me. The video showed Jasmine grabbing my shoulders and shoving me backward while I was actively performing life-saving CPR. It captured me throwing my elbow back to protect the patient's airway and pointing my finger at Patricia to force her away from the sterile field. The video proved everything. It proved the extreme negligence. It proved the life-saving medical intervention. It proved the physical assault on a responding physician. Most importantly, it proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that every single word Harrison, Jasmine, and Patricia had spoken to the CPS agent was a calculated, malicious lie. Brenda Caldwell paused the video. The expression on her face was a mixture of absolute disgust and professional fury. She closed her laptop with a sharp, heavy snap. She looked at the two police officers who were already reaching for their radios to call for backup. Dr. Olivia Caldwell said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. "I sincerely apologize for bringing you into this interrogation room. You are completely cleared of all accusations." Vincent Cole adjusted his tie, a sharp, predatory smile forming on his face. "Agent Caldwell, what is the penalty for filing a false police report, committing felony perjury, and physically assaulting a medical professional during an active resuscitation?" Caldwell stood up from the metal table, grabbing her thick leather binder. "Severe," she replied coldly. "Those people in the waiting room are not going home tonight. They are going straight to a holding cell. And I am taking emergency custody of that child the second he is medically cleared." I walked out of the administrative office and stood in the hallway, looking through the glass doors toward the waiting room. Harrison was currently checking his expensive watch, completely unaware that his luxury smart home cameras had just handed the state all the evidence they needed to destroy his life. The police officers were already marching toward him, pulling their handcuffs from their belts. The trap had violently snapped shut. The two armed police officers bypassed the busy triage desk and marched with absolute terrifying purpose toward the waiting area. Harrison was still angrily tapping his designer leather shoe against the linoleum, demanding that the hospital administrator come down immediately and fire me. He was so completely absorbed in his own arrogant tirade that he did not even notice the officers until a heavy, authoritative hand clamped down firmly on his expensive linen shoulder. Harrison spun around his mouth, opening to yell at whatever low-level security guard had dared to lay hands on him. The vicious words died instantly in his throat the second he registered the silver police badges. The lead officer looked Harrison dead in the eye and informed both him and Jasmine that they were being officially detained for questioning regarding felony child endangerment and filing a false police report. Jasmine shrieked. She recoiled violently, demanding her lawyers and screaming that they were targeting the wrong people. Patricia tried to physically intervene, stepping between the officers and her golden son. She loudly reminded the police about their elite country club memberships and their massive corporate connections, demanding that they show some respect. The police officers did not care about her tax bracket. They calmly but forcefully escorted Harrison and Jasmine to separate, windowless holding rooms located deep within the hospital security wing. Harrison immediately invoked his right to legal counsel. He refused to speak another word to the investigators. Within an hour, his high-priced corporate defense attorney, a slick, ruthless man named Bradley, rushed through the emergency room doors. Harrison was terrified, but his massive ego convinced him he could still buy his way out of a felony. Sitting in the sterile, cramped security room, Harrison commanded Bradley to make the incriminating video footage disappear. Harrison offered to pay Bradley triple his usual exorbitant hourly rate if the lawyer could file an emergency injunction to suppress the cloud data. Harrison desperately argued that the digital video was seized without proper jurisdiction. He claimed the police had violated his strict residential privacy rights by pulling footage from inside a private gated community without allowing him a chance to review it. He wanted the undeniable visual proof thrown out on a fabricated legal technicality. Bradley, completely blinded by the promise of a massive under-the-table bonus, agreed to play dirty. The corrupt lawyer began furiously drafting a motion to suppress the video, aiming to drag the legal process out for years and bury the stark truth under a mountain of expensive corporate litigation. Vincent Cole received an alert regarding Bradley's aggressive legal maneuver. My defense attorney walked back into the hospital administration office where I was sitting quietly with Agent Caldwell. Vincent explained that Harrison was trying to use his vast wealth to choke the local justice system. Harrison truly believed that if he could just eliminate the video, the entire case would devolve into a messy, unprovable dispute of their words against mine. He genuinely thought he could purchase his way out of an attempted homicide investigation. I smiled coldly. Harrison had made a fatal miscalculation. He forgot that he was actively fighting a war inside a highly regulated, federally monitored medical facility. He forgot that emergency medicine does not operate on subjective testimonies or slick legal arguments. Emergency medicine operates on cold, hard, indisputable biological data. Video footage could be debated and delayed by corrupt lawyers, but human biology cannot be argued in a courtroom. I turned to Vincent and handed him a sealed, heavily authenticated medical folder. I explained that before I even walked into the interrogation room to give my initial statement, I had marched straight to the hospital's occupational health department. I voluntarily submitted myself to a full comprehensive toxicology screen under strict supervision. I had my blood drawn and my urine tested by an independent certified laboratory technician. The results inside that folder proved that my system was completely clear of any alcohol, narcotics, or prescription sedatives. I was 100% sober, alert, and medically sound when I pulled Leo from the bottom of that freezing lake. But my ironclad defense was only half of the strategy. I looked at Agent Caldwell and explained a crucial, unalterable protocol of our emergency department. When Jasmine had shrieked in the waiting room that I violently assaulted her on the dock, she had aggressively demanded immediate medical attention. She insisted on being officially registered as a patient so the hospital could document her alleged injuries. Harrison had quickly stressed due to my supposed violent attack. The moment they formally registered as patients in my emergency room, they became subject to our standard non-negotiable trauma protocols. Any patient entering the ER claiming physical assault, domestic violence, or severe acute stress requires a comprehensive metabolic panel and a basic toxicology screen to establish a clinical baseline. It is standard operating procedure to ensure no underlying substances are masking internal injuries. Our phlebotomists had drawn their blood while they were sitting in the observation bays, waiting to formulate their next vicious lie. I pulled out the second, far more destructive medical folder. I had Vincent formally subpoena the hospital admission records for both Harrison and Jasmine. The certified laboratory results were sitting right there on the desk. The numbers were absolutely staggering. Jasmine possessed a blood alcohol content of 0.18, more than twice the legal driving limit. Harrison registered an astonishing 0.21. Furthermore, the advanced screening detected positive trace amounts of illegal, recreational narcotics in both of their bloodstreams. They were biologically, undeniably, and severely intoxicated. Vincent Cole did not wait for a courtroom hearing. He took the folders and marched directly down the long hallway to the security holding rooms, where Bradley was busy drafting his corrupt motion to suppress the video. Vincent bypassed all polite legal greetings. He pushed open the heavy door and slammed the certified laboratory results onto the metal table right in front of Harrison and his slick attorney. Vincent pointed a sharp finger at the undeniable medical data. He informed Bradley that even if he successfully suppressed the video footage through corrupt legal maneuvering, the biological evidence was permanently logged in a federally protected medical database. The hospital records proved with absolute scientific certainty that Harrison and Jasmine were dangerously intoxicated while responsible for a 4-year-old child near a deep body of water. The records proved they were heavily under the influence of illegal narcotics when they gave their sworn fabricated statements to the police. Their entire defense strategy was completely obliterated in a single instant. Bradley stared down at the toxicology reports. The color rapidly drained from the lawyer's face as he realized his arrogant client had just dragged him into a hopeless, unwinnable criminal case. Bradley slowly closed his leather briefcase, looking at Harrison with pure, unadulterated professional disgust. Harrison sat frozen in the cold metal chair. The wealthy corporate executive finally realized that his massive bank account could not alter his own blood chemistry. The medical data had completely cornered them. There was no legal loophole. There was no corporate buyout. They were legally, scientifically, and entirely trapped. But pathological narcissists do not surrender when cornered by cold reality. They simply change the battlefield entirely. Harrison and Jasmine managed to post an exorbitant bail the following morning, walking out of the Central Police Precinct with their fragile corporate reputations hanging by a microscopic thread. Bradley, their highly paid defense attorney, had bluntly informed them that severe criminal charges were absolutely imminent. The toxicology report was bulletproof. The high-definition security footage was securely logged in the state evidence vault. They had absolutely no legitimate legal defense left to deploy in a court of law. So Patricia and Jasmine decided to launch the ultimate nuclear option. If they could not defeat me in a strict legal environment, they would completely obliterate my existence in the court of public opinion. They retreated to the heavily mortgaged lake house and immediately began orchestrating a vicious, highly calculated digital smear campaign. Patricia knew exactly how to weaponize the affluent suburban community she ruled over with an iron fist. She understood perfectly that blind outrage is the most powerful and destructive currency on the internet. She intended to use that outrage to burn my career to the ground. By Tuesday evening, a massive, emotionally charged post went live on Facebook, Instagram, and several prominent local community forums. Jasmine had taken a closely cropped, heavily filtered photograph of the dark bruising on Leo's small chest, the exact bruising caused by my life-saving cardiopulmonary resuscitation. She deliberately stripped away all clinical context and medical reality. Beneath that horrifying image, Patricia wrote a staggering, entirely fabricated essay. She claimed that her deeply disturbed, insanely jealous daughter had suffered a severe psychotic break at a peaceful family gathering. Patricia wrote that I had violently shoved my innocent 4-year-old nephew into a freezing lake out of pure spite and then physically battered him on the wooden dock so I could pretend to play the hero. She painted herself and Jasmine as the desperate, traumatized victims who had to physically fight off a deranged medical professional just to save their beloved child. To make matters infinitely worse, they attached a crowdfunding link directly to the bottom of the post. They shamelessly begged the public for $500,000, claiming they urgently needed the funds for specialized pediatric trauma therapy and exorbitant legal fees to protect their innocent family from a dangerous medical predator. They claimed the justice system was failing them, and they needed the community to step up and fund their fight for survival. The vicious fabrication was a masterclass in psychological manipulation, and the internet swallowed the bait whole without a single second of hesitation. Within 6 hours, the malicious post was shared over 50,000 times across the state. Local parenting bloggers, neighborhood watch groups, and outrage-driven social media influencers amplified the horrific lie without performing a single factual background check. The comment section instantly devolved into a terrifying digital mob, demanding my immediate arrest, public shaming, and the permanent revocation of my medical license. But the mob did not stop at mere social media outrage. Patricia had deliberately tagged the official corporate social media accounts of Metropolitan General Hospital in her initial post, ensuring her wealthy country club friends knew exactly where to direct their targeted fury. The hospital communication center was hit with an absolute avalanche of aggressive, unrelenting phone calls. Furious community members flooded the switchboard lines, screaming at the terrified receptionists and demanding that the administration terminate my employment immediately. Angry citizens threatened to organize a massive physical protest directly outside the emergency room ambulance bay if I was allowed to treat another vulnerable patient. They aggressively claimed I was a lethal threat to public safety, a monster hiding behind a white coat, and a complete disgrace to the entire medical profession. The intense public pressure created an immediate, catastrophic administrative nightmare for my employer. I was in the middle of meticulously suturing a severe laceration in Trauma Bay 3. When a stern hospital security guard tapped me sharply on the shoulder. He informed me that my presence was required in the executive boardroom immediately. I handed my surgical instruments to an attending resident, washed my hands with cold water, and walked swiftly toward the administrative wing. My heart pounded with a steady, sharp rhythm, but I kept my face entirely impassive. I pushed open the heavy oak doors of the boardroom to find a high-stakes professional tribunal waiting for my arrival. The chief executive officer of the hospital sat rigidly at the head of the polished mahogany table, his hands clasped tightly together. Two visibly tense corporate lawyers from the hospital risk management department flanked him, clutching thick legal folders filled with printed screenshots of the viral post. Dr. Eris Thorne stood firmly by the large window, his jaw clenched in quiet, simmering fury as he stared out at the parking lot. The CEO slid a digital tablet across the long table, displaying the viral crowdfunding page featuring my professional headshot plastered directly next to the word predator. The hospital public relations department was actively bleeding out from the relentless digital assault. The CEO looked me dead in the eye and delivered a devastating corporate ultimatum. Several local news stations were currently parking their large broadcast vans right on the hospital front lawn, demanding a statement from the board. The administration was heavily considering placing me on immediate indefinite administrative leave pending a formal internal investigation. I stood at the opposite end of the mahogany table, listening to the lawyers explain how my mere presence in the emergency room was a massive liability for the hospital's reputation. They spoke about damage control, stakeholder confidence, and public perception. They did not care about the medical truth or the fact that I had saved a child's life just days prior. They only cared about stopping the aggressive public relations hemorrhage caused by my family's relentless social media campaign. The CEO tapped his pen against the wooden table, waiting for me to surrender my badge and walk out the back door in disgrace. My entire professional life, built on a decade of brutal sacrifice and unwavering dedication, was teetering on the edge of total annihilation. I took a slow, deep breath, looking directly at the corporate lawyers who thought they could bully me into a quiet submission. I was not about to let a fabricated internet post destroy my life. I reached into the pocket of my white coat and pulled out the business card belonging to Vincent Cole. I placed it perfectly in the center of the polished mahogany table, right next to the digital tablet, displaying the malicious crowdfunding page. I slid the card toward the chief executive officer. I strongly suggest your risk management department contact my defense attorney before you make a catastrophic administrative error. I stated, my voice echoing loudly in the tense boardroom. You are currently looking at a fabricated social media post. My attorney is currently holding high-definition security footage, certified hospital toxicology reports, and an active child endangerment investigation filed by the state. The two corporate lawyers stared at the business card. They recognized Vincent Cole's name immediately. He was notorious in the city for annihilating hospitals in wrongful termination lawsuits. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the table. If you place me on administrative leave, you will be punishing a responding trauma physician who successfully performed an out-of-hospital resuscitation. You will be actively retaliating against a mandatory reporter who provided evidence to Child Protective Services. You will not just face a wrongful termination lawsuit. You will face a public relations apocalypse when the local news stations discover you fired a doctor for saving a dying 4-year-old boy from his heavily intoxicated parents. Dr. Eris Thorne stepped away from the window and walked directly to the table. He slammed his fist down, startling the lawyers. She is not going anywhere. Dr. Thorne roared, his heavy voice leaving absolutely no room for debate. Dr. Olivia followed exact clinical protocols. She saved a pediatric patient in the field and brought him to our trauma bay alive. If you suspend my best attending physician over a hysterical internet mob generated by a pair of drunken, negligent parents, I will personally hand my resignation to the board of directors tomorrow morning. And I will take half the emergency department staff with me. The chief executive officer swallowed hard. The threat of losing his chief of emergency medicine and facing a massive retaliation lawsuit from Vincent Cole instantly outweighed the angry phone calls flooding the switchboard. The CEO slid the digital tablet away and nodded sharply. The administration backed down. I walked out of that boardroom with my job entirely secure, returning to the trauma bay to finish my shift. The hospital issued a brief, sterile public relations statement, confirming their unwavering support for their medical staff and refusing to comment on active state investigations. But the war was far from over. Harrison and Patricia watched their viral social media campaign fail to terminate my employment. The hospital stood behind me. The local news stations eventually lost interest when the administration refused to feed the drama. My brother realized that public outrage was simply not enough to destroy me. He needed an institution with the absolute legal authority to strip away my entire identity. He needed to strike at the very foundation of my existence. 3 days later, I walked down the driveway of my apartment complex to check my mail. Tucked between a stack of utility bills and grocery flyers was a thick, heavy envelope sent via certified mail. The return address made the blood freeze entirely in my veins. It bore the official embossed seal of the State Medical Board. My hands shook violently as I tore open the heavy envelope right there in the driveway. A medical board complaint is the ultimate nightmare for any practicing physician. It is not a civil lawsuit that can be settled with money. It is a formal federal tribunal. The board possesses the unilateral power to suspend your medical license, revoke your prescribing privileges, and enter your name into the National Practitioner Databank. A permanent mark on that database means your career is effectively annihilated nationwide. You cannot work in another state. You cannot join another hospital. 10 years of grueling medical school, hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loans, and thousands of sleepless nights in residency can be wiped out with a single stroke of a pen. I stood in the cold breeze reading the formal notice of investigation. Harrison had escalated his psychological warfare to a lethal, unforgiving level. He had filed a formal sworn complaint against my medical license, utilizing his expensive corporate letterhead to make the allegations appear legitimate and highly professional. The fabricated claims detailed in the document were absolutely monstrous. Harrison alleged that I arrived at his private residential gathering severely under the influence of illicit narcotics. He falsely stated that I hallucinated an emergency and violently attacked his son under the guise of rendering medical aid. He claimed that Leo had simply slipped on the wet dock and was breathing perfectly fine until I aggressively pinned the child down and began performing medically unnecessary and reckless chest compressions. Harrison included high-resolution photographs of the severe bruising on Leo's chest, intentionally framing the life-saving CPR as a malicious drug-fueled assault by an unstable medical professional. To make the fraudulent complaint even more devastating, Harrison had paid an exorbitant fee to hire a sleazy, unethical, independent medical expert. This hired doctor, who had never even examined Leo, signed a sworn affidavit supporting Harrison's ridiculous narrative. The affidavit claimed that the rib fractures were consistent with blunt force trauma rather than standard resuscitation efforts. My brother was actively trying to send me to federal prison while simultaneously destroying my ability to earn a living. I rushed back into my apartment and immediately called Vincent Cole. I read the terrifying allegations over the phone, my voice cracking under the sheer weight of the threat. If the medical board decided to issue an emergency suspension pending their formal review, I would be legally barred from stepping foot inside the emergency room. My entire life was hanging by a dangerously fragile thread. Vincent remained remarkably calm on the other end of the line. He asked me to read the specific legal phrasing Harrison used in the final paragraph of the complaint. As I read the words aloud, Vincent stopped me. He let out a dark, knowing chuckle. "They are not just trying to take your medical license, doctor," Vincent explained, his voice turning razor sharp. "Look at the specific damage claims they are listing. They are demanding compensation for long-term psychological trauma and future pediatric rehabilitation. This medical board complaint is just the battering ram. They are trying to force the state to validate their fake abuse allegations so they can use that official ruling to trigger a massive payout." I gripped the phone tightly, my mind racing to connect the dots. A payout from who? I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. "From your medical malpractice insurance," Vincent replied coldly. "You carry a multi-million-dollar liability policy as an attending trauma physician. If the state medical board sanctions your license, Harrison can bypass a standard civil trial and file a direct catastrophic claim against your insurance provider. He is trying to force your insurance company to settle out of court for millions of dollars to avoid a messy public trial." I sank down onto my kitchen chair, completely stunned by the sheer, calculated evil of his plan. Narcissists will certainly lie to protect their fragile egos, but they do not spend tens of thousands of dollars on corrupt independent medical experts and complex legal filings just for revenge. They do it for money. Harrison was expending massive amounts of capital to push this aggressive legal narrative. He was fighting with the reckless, unhinged desperation of a man who had absolutely nothing left to lose. "Why is he doing this?" I whispered into the phone. "He has a massive corporate salary. He owns a lake house. Why is he trying to extort my malpractice insurance?" Vincent paused for a moment. "People with real money do not pull desperate extortion scams on their own family members," Vincent stated bluntly. "Your brother is hiding something massive. We are done playing defense. It is time to go on the hunt. Give me the authorization to hire a forensic private investigator. We need to rip Harrison's entire financial life apart immediately." I looked down at the heavy, terrifying medical board complaint resting on my kitchen table. My family wanted to play a high-stakes game of total destruction. They wanted to threaten my survival. I picked up the document, my fear rapidly hardening into pure, unadulterated fury. I gave Vincent the authorization to launch the investigation. I was going to find out exactly what Harrison was hiding, and I was going to use his own dark secrets to burn his fake corporate empire to the ground. Vincent did not waste a single hour. He immediately contracted a former federal forensic accountant turned private investigator named David Rollins. Rollins specialized in piercing corporate veils and tracking hidden financial hemorrhages. I transferred his exorbitant retainer fee without a single moment of hesitation. My medical career, my financial stability, and my fundamental freedom were on the line. I needed hard, undeniable proof of my brother's actual financial status. I needed to know exactly what was driving this level of unhinged, malicious legal warfare. For 48 hours, I continued to work my scheduled shifts in the emergency department. I operated under the looming shadow of the medical board investigation, actively pushing the anxiety down into a dark box in my mind while I treated severe trauma patients. I kept my head held high, completely ignoring the whispers and the lingering stares from a few gossiping hospital staff members who had seen Patricia's viral social media post. I focused entirely on the medicine, trusting my legal team to handle the impending war. On Thursday evening, Vincent called me into his downtown law office. I sat across from his massive glass desk. David Rollins sat next to him, pushing a thick, heavily tabbed binder toward me. The contents of that binder were absolutely staggering. It was not just a revelation. It was the complete violent obliteration of Harrison's entire fake identity. Harrison was not a successful corporate executive. He was a colossal, desperate fraud. According to the forensic financial records Rollins had legally obtained, Harrison had been quietly terminated from his senior executive position at the real estate investment firm over 6 months ago. He was fired for gross financial mismanagement and suspected embezzlement. The firm had opted for a quiet termination and a severe non-disclosure agreement rather than a public scandal to protect their own stock prices. Harrison had been lying to Patricia, lying to Jasmine, and lying to his entire social circle for half a year. Without his massive corporate salary, Harrison had spiraled completely out of control. The financial documents showed hundreds of thousands of dollars flowing rapidly out of his accounts and directly into offshore sports betting syndicates and high-stakes underground poker rings. He possessed a crippling, entirely unmanageable gambling addiction. He had liquidated his entire retirement portfolio. He had emptied Leo's college savings accounts. He had drained every single penny of liquidity he possessed to chase his rapidly mounting losses. The gorgeous summer lake house where the horrific drowning incident occurred was not a status symbol. It was a massive ticking liability. Harrison had secretly taken out 3 separate high-interest mortgages on the property to cover his gambling debts. He was currently in severe default on every single one of those loans. The primary bank had already filed formal foreclosure notices with the county. The bank was legally scheduled to seize the lake property and forcibly evict Harrison, Jasmine, and Patricia in exactly 22 days. The puzzle pieces aggressively locked into place. The realization hit me with the catastrophic force of a freight train. The malicious viral Facebook post, the highly coordinated social media smear campaign, the fraudulent, extremely expensive medical board complaint. None of this was ever about getting justice for Leo. None of it was about parental grief or a tragic accident. It was a highly calculated, desperate extortion plot specifically designed to trigger a multi-million-dollar settlement from my medical malpractice insurance policy. Vincent explained the exact mechanics of their sinister legal strategy. Harrison knew he was about to lose the lake house, his luxury cars, and his elite country club status. He needed a massive, immediate influx of untraceable cash to avoid absolute ruin. When I pulled Leo out of that freezing lake, Harrison did not see a rescued son. He saw a walking lottery ticket. By falsely accusing me of medical battery and child endangerment, Harrison intended to force my liability provider to offer a rapid, massive financial settlement just to avoid a lengthy, highly publicized civil trial. He was literally trying to monetize his own child's near-death experience to pay off his illegal gambling debts. I stared at the financial documents, feeling a profound, chilling disgust radiate through my entire body. Patricia and Jasmine were absolutely complicit in the scam. The forensic timeline proved they knew exactly how desperate the financial situation had become just days before the lake party. They willfully participated in the theatrical performance in the emergency room waiting area. They willingly perjured themselves to the Child Protective Services agent. They deliberately tried to destroy my life, my reputation, and my freedom, all to secure a fraudulent insurance payout that would keep them draped in designer clothing for a few more years. They were willing to send me to federal prison just to maintain their fake wealthy aesthetic. I closed the thick binder and looked directly at my defense attorney. The shock evaporated, instantly replaced by cold surgical calculation. I asked Vincent exactly how we were going to weaponize this highly explosive financial intelligence. Vincent leaned back in his leather chair, a predatory smile forming on his face. He explained that we were no longer just defending my medical license against a fraudulent complaint. We were going to actively dismantle their extortion ring in the most public, humiliating arena possible. Patricia was currently ignoring the harsh reality of her impending bankruptcy by throwing a lavish charity gala at her elite country club that upcoming weekend. She was desperately attempting to maintain her fake social standing while the walls violently collapsed around her. Vincent produced a fresh stack of heavy legal documents from his briefcase. They were civil lawsuits for defamation, libel, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and aggressive insurance fraud. He also held the official court-certified copies of the forensic financial report. We were going to serve them with these lawsuits in front of every single wealthy donor and corporate associate they possessed. We were going to rip the masks right off their faces. The very next evening, the grand ballroom of the Oak Ridge Country Club provided the perfect stage for that exact execution. Patricia had spent months meticulously planning this annual charity gala. It was her crowning social achievement, a lavish event designed to solidify her status among the absolute elite of the city. The room was dripping with obscene wealth. Massive chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over tables draped in imported silk. Towering centerpieces of white orchids obscured the faces of local politicians, tech investors, and prominent banking executives. To the untrained eye, it was a flawless gathering of high society. To me, standing quietly in the shadows near the catering entrance, it was a room full of heavily mortgaged narcissists dancing on the edge of a cliff. I wore a simple tailored black dress, holding a glass of sparkling water. Vincent Cole stood right beside me, checking the silver watch on his wrist. We had not come to cause a chaotic scene or scream into a microphone. We had come to let the legal system do the heavy lifting. I watched my family from across the expansive room. They were working the crowd with terrifying desperation. Harrison was sweating profusely inside his tailored tuxedo, aggressively cornering a senior vice president of a regional bank. He was likely pitching a fictitious investment opportunity, desperately trying to secure a massive personal loan to stave off his imminent foreclosure. Jasmine was parroting around the silent auction tables, flaunting rented diamond earrings and sipping premium champagne, completely ignoring the fact that her credit score was currently in a catastrophic freefall. At the center of it all was Patricia. She was holding court near the grand staircase, wearing a custom emerald gown, accepting empty compliments from wealthy socialites. She looked entirely invincible. She believed her malicious social media campaign had successfully destroyed my medical career. She believed her fraudulent medical board complaint was currently triggering a massive malpractice settlement. She genuinely thought she had outsmarted a trauma physician. A sharp, high-pitched chime rang through the ballroom as the event coordinator tapped a crystal glass. The classical string quartet stopped playing. The room fell into a polite, expectant hush. Patricia gracefully ascended the steps to the main podium, adjusting the microphone with a practiced, elegant smile. The spotlight hit her directly. "Thank you all for joining us tonight," Patricia began, her voice echoing smoothly through the premium sound system. "This year has been an incredible journey of resilience for my family. As many of you know, we recently faced a horrifying medical emergency involving my precious grandson. It tested our strength, our faith, and our family bonds. But standing here tonight, looking at all of you, generous, supportive friends, I am reminded that truth and justice always prevail." The sheer blinding hypocrisy of her words made my blood run ice cold. She was actively using Leo's near-death experience to solicit charity donations and garner social sympathy. She was playing the victim card in front of the most powerful people in the city. Vincent Cole tapped my shoulder and gave me a single sharp nod. The trap was officially sprung. The heavy polished oak doors at the main entrance of the ballroom pushed open. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a sharp gray suit stepped onto the plush carpet. He was not a guest. He was a professional, highly aggressive process server hired directly by Vincent Cole. He carried 3 thick, heavy manila envelopes in his left hand. He did not pause at the reception desk. He did not care about the formal dress code or the silent auction. He walked with heavy, undeniable purpose straight down the center aisle of the ballroom, cutting directly through the crowd of elite donors. Patricia paused mid-sentence, her eyes narrowing in confusion as she watched the stranger march toward her stage. The wealthy guests turned their heads, murmuring quietly to one another. Harrison noticed the disruption and quickly stepped away from the bank executive, his brow furrowing. Jasmine lowered her champagne glass, sensing a sudden, inexplicable shift in the atmosphere. "Excuse me, sir," Patricia said into the hot microphone, her voice dripping with condescension. "This is a private ticketed charity event. You are interrupting my keynote address. Security will escort you out immediately." The process server did not stop. He walked right up to the edge of the elevated stage. He looked directly at Patricia, his voice booming loud and clear, carrying easily to the front rows and echoing faintly through the microphone. "Patricia, Harrison, and Jasmine," the process server declared, pointing to each of them with absolute authority. "You have been formally served." He slapped the first heavy envelope directly onto the podium, right on top of Patricia's prepared speech notes. He turned sharply, intercepting Harrison, who was rushing the stage, and slammed the second envelope firmly into his chest. Jasmine gasped as the server thrust the third envelope into her trembling hands. "What is the meaning of this outrage?" Patricia shrieked, forgetting to pull away from the microphone. Her panicked, shrill voice blasted through the entire ballroom. "What are these documents?" The process server took one step back, ensuring his voice was projected with maximum legal clarity. "You are being sued in civil court for multi-million-dollar damages. The charges include malicious defamation, libel, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and coordinated insurance fraud. You are ordered to appear in Superior Court to answer for the fabricated medical board complaints and the falsified child endangerment reports you filed against Dr. Olivia. Have a pleasant evening." The process server turned on his heel and walked calmly back up the center aisle, leaving absolute apocalyptic destruction in his wake. The ballroom descended into dead, horrifying silence. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The elite socialites, the bank executives, and the local politicians stared at the stage in sheer, unadulterated shock. The words insurance fraud and falsified child endangerment hung heavily in the air. In high society, bankruptcy is a secret, but fraud is a permanent, incurable disease. Patricia stood frozen at the podium. Her face drained of all color, transforming her skin to a sickly, translucent white. Her hands shook so violently that the heavy legal envelope slipped from the podium and crashed onto the wooden stage. Harrison tore open his envelope with frantic, desperate movements. His eyes scanned the front page of the lawsuit, reading the catastrophic financial damages Vincent Cole was legally demanding. Harrison literally gasped for air, clutching his chest as if he were experiencing a severe cardiac event. He looked up, making direct eye contact with the bank executive he had been pitching a loan to just 5 minutes earlier. The executive took 2 deliberate steps backward, his face twisting with profound professional disgust. Jasmine let out a pathetic, high-pitched whimper. She dropped her crystal champagne flute. It shattered against the ballroom floor, the sharp noise echoing like a gunshot through the silent room. She tried to hide her face behind her hands, realizing that every single country club wife she had ever tried to impress was currently staring at her with burning contempt. From the shadows of the catering entrance, I stepped forward just enough for the light to catch my face. Harrison looked across the massive room and locked eyes with me. He saw my black dress. He saw the cold, surgical lack of mercy in my expression. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply raised my glass of sparkling water in a silent, mocking toast to his completely ruined empire. The murmurs began. The whispers spread through the ballroom like a terrifying wildfire. Guests were already pulling out their smartphones, texting the scandalous news to people outside the country club. The pristine, untouchable reputation my family had spent 2 decades building was entirely incinerated in less than 60 seconds. I turned my back on the collapsing room, handed my empty glass to a stunned waiter, and walked out the service doors into the cool night air. The real warfare had just begun, and they were completely unarmed. 2 weeks after the gala, the sterile, freezing conference room of Vincent Cole's downtown law firm served as the execution chamber for my family's remaining dignity. The heavy mahogany table separated the 2 factions. On my side sat Vincent, radiating pure predatory calm, with stacks of neatly indexed legal binders arranged before him. I sat beside him wearing a sharp navy suit, my posture perfectly rigid, my face an impenetrable mask of clinical detachment. Across the table sat my family. They looked absolutely hollowed out. The stress of the impending lawsuits and the catastrophic social fallout from the charity gala had visibly aged them. Harrison's expensive suit hung loosely on his frame. His eyes were bloodshot, darting nervously around the room. Patricia clutched a designer handbag tightly in her lap, her knuckles white, her lips pressed into a thin, bitter line. Jasmine sat furthest away from them, her arms crossed defensively, chewing aggressively on the inside of her cheek. Their new defense attorney, a visibly exhausted man named Sterling, sat at the edge of his seat, already looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. A certified court reporter sat at the head of the table, her fingers poised over the stenography machine, ready to permanently record every single word spoken under penalty of perjury. Vincent did not start with pleasantries. He started the deposition by sliding a thick, heavily authenticated folder directly across the table toward Harrison. The folder contained the forensic financial reports detailing the offshore gambling accounts, the hidden mortgages, and the imminent foreclosure of the lake house. Vincent leaned forward, his voice cutting through the silent room like a scalpel. "Let the record reflect that we are presenting Exhibit A, a comprehensive forensic accounting of Harrison's current financial liabilities," Vincent stated. "Harrison, you are currently under oath. Do you confirm that at the exact time you filed the medical board complaint against my client, you were facing severe unmanageable debt and the immediate loss of your primary residence?" Sterling immediately raised his hand, attempting to shield his client. "I object to the relevance of this line of questioning. My client's financial status has no bearing on the events that occurred at the lake." Vincent smiled a cold, razor-sharp smile. "It has absolute bearing on motive, counselor. My client is accusing your clients of coordinated insurance fraud and extortion. The financial desperation is the entire foundation of their malicious actions." Vincent turned his piercing gaze back to Harrison. "Answer the question, Harrison. Are you entirely bankrupt?" Harrison swallowed hard. A bead of sweat rolled down his pale forehead. He looked at Sterling, who gave him a grim, reluctant nod. If Harrison lied right now, he would be committing felony perjury on the official record. "Yes." Harrison choked out, his voice barely a whisper. "I am in debt." Vincent did not give him a single second to breathe. He immediately slid a second folder across the mahogany table. This one was pushed directly in front of Jasmine. Inside were high-resolution time-stamped screenshots of the viral Facebook post, the fraudulent GoFundMe campaign, and the malicious emails sent to the hospital administration. "Jasmine," Vincent said, his tone turning dangerously low, "you are also under oath today. You publicly claimed that my client, an attending trauma physician, violently assaulted you and attempted to murder your son. You solicited hundreds of thousands of dollars from the public based on that specific narrative. Are you aware of the federal penalties for wire fraud and perjury?" Jasmine flinched. She stared down at the printed screenshots of her own lies. The reality of federal prison was suddenly staring her right in the face. Vincent pulled a remote control from his suit pocket and pointed it at the large flat-screen television mounted on the conference room wall. "We have already secured the unedited high-definition security footage from the lake house," Vincent declared loudly. "We have the certified hospital toxicology reports proving you and your husband were severely intoxicated. We have the official Child Protective Services investigation naming you as negligent parents. If you maintain your fabricated story today, I will personally ensure the district attorney receives this entire transcript for immediate criminal prosecution. I am giving you one final chance to tell the truth. Who orchestrated this smear campaign?" The silence in the room became absolutely suffocating. The ticking of the wall clock echoed like a sledgehammer. Patricia leaned toward Jasmine, her voice dropping to a harsh, commanding hiss. "Keep your mouth shut, Jasmine. Let the lawyers handle this. Do not say a single word." That was the breaking point. The immense pressure of the impending criminal charges, combined with Patricia's relentless, suffocating control, caused Jasmine to completely snap. The pristine, superficial loyalty she held for her wealthy in-laws violently shattered into a million pieces. Jasmine slammed her hands down on the mahogany table and shoved her chair backward. She turned on Patricia with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. "I am not going to federal prison for you," Jasmine screamed, her voice bouncing aggressively off the glass walls. "I am not losing my son because your pathetic son gambled away all our money. I am done covering for this psychotic family." Patricia gasped, clutching her chest in sheer horror. "Jasmine, sit down and shut your mouth this instant. You are ruining everything." Jasmine ignored her completely. She turned directly toward the court reporter, ensuring her words were captured perfectly on the official record. "Put this on the record," Jasmine shouted frantically. "I did not write that Facebook post. Patricia wrote it. Patricia orchestrated the entire thing. She knew we were bankrupt. She told us that if we framed Olivia for the drowning, we could sue her medical malpractice insurance for $5 million. Patricia said it was the only way to save the country club memberships and keep the house. She forced me to take the pictures of Leo's bruises. She forced me to lie to the social worker. It was all her idea." Harrison jumped up from his chair, reaching out to grab his wife's arm. "Jasmine, what are you doing? Are you insane? You are throwing my mother under the bus." Jasmine violently slapped his hand away. "Your mother is a monster, Harrison, and you are a pathetic, broke coward. I am filing for divorce the second I leave this building, and I am taking Leo far away from all of you. You can all burn in hell." Total apocalyptic chaos erupted inside the conference room. Patricia lunged across the table, her face contorted with ugly, desperate rage, screaming that Jasmine was a gold-digging liar. Harrison was yelling at both of them to stop talking. Sterling, their completely overwhelmed defense attorney, was rubbing his temples and shouting that the deposition was officially terminated, frantically trying to pack his briefcase and escape the imploding legal disaster. I sat perfectly still beside Vincent. I did not say a word. I did not need to. The toxic, parasitic family unit that had spent my entire life trying to tear me down was currently ripping each other to shreds under the crushing weight of their own greed. The facade of their elite, untouchable wealth was entirely gone, replaced by the ugly, raw reality of their deceit. Vincent leaned back in his leather chair, a slow, deeply satisfied smile spreading across his face as the court reporter continued to type every single incriminating, destructive word. The trap had worked flawlessly. They had executed themselves. The legal fallout from that explosive deposition was immediate and absolutely catastrophic. Vincent Cole wasted zero time. Within 48 hours, he filed the unredacted sworn transcripts directly into the public court record. The official Child Protective Services report was finalized simultaneously, formally citing both Harrison and Jasmine for severe child neglect and active endangerment. Those documents were no longer hidden behind the closed doors of a law firm. They became highly weaponized public information. Harrison had recently managed to secure a fragile but lucrative executive consultancy contract with a prominent national wealth management firm. He was desperately using this position to project an illusion of stability and delay his impending bankruptcy. That illusion shattered instantly. An anonymous source forwarded the unsealed court documents and the verified CPS findings directly to the corporate compliance department of Harrison's new employer. The corporate response was brutal and unyielding. Financial institutions rely entirely on public trust and strict ethical integrity. Having a senior executive officially cited for coordinated insurance fraud, perjury, and child endangerment was a radioactive liability. Harrison was summoned to the Human Resources Department the very next morning. He was not offered a quiet resignation or a comfortable severance package. The head of compliance stripped Harrison of his corporate badge, confiscated his company electronics, and terminated his contract on the spot for severe ethical violations. 2 armed corporate security guards escorted him out of the glass building in front of his entire department. That public termination severed Harrison's final desperate financial lifeline. The regional bank holding the 3 heavily defaulted mortgages on the Summer Lake house received automated notifications of his complete loss of income. The bank acted with zero mercy. Their legal division pulled the trigger, accelerating the foreclosure proceedings from a pending status to an active, aggressive seizure. Less than a week after the deposition, a county sheriff patrol vehicle pulled up to the pristine driveway of the sprawling lake property. Patricia and Harrison were forced to watch in sheer horror as armed deputies marched up the stone steps. The officers bypassed the expensive landscaping and taped a bright yellow, highly visible notice of public auction and immediate eviction directly onto the custom mahogany front door. The physical manifestation of their elite social standing was officially repossessed by the state. They were legally ordered to vacate the premises entirely within 72 hours. The bank seized the luxury vehicles. The state slated their designer furniture for public auction to cover the massive gambling debts. The very wooden dock where I had shattered my knees to save a dying child was now locked behind heavy iron chains and bright red bank-owned property signs. The fake, glamorous empire they had used to humiliate me for over a decade completely collapsed into a pile of worthless legal rubble. They were entirely destitute. 3 days after the bank chained their front doors, I walked out of the emergency room staff exit into the freezing night air. My 12-hour shift was over. I was exhausted, but it was the deeply satisfying kind of exhaustion that comes from saving lives, not from managing toxic family drama. I pulled my heavy winter coat tightly around my shoulders and reached into my pocket for my car keys. A sudden frantic movement near the concrete visitor parking structure caught my eye. 3 figures emerged rapidly from the dark shadows. They looked completely unrecognizable. The pristine designer clothing was gone, replaced by wrinkled, mismatched sweatpants and cheap, unbranded winter jackets. It was Patricia Harrison and Jasmine. They had parked a battered rental car 2 blocks down the street because their luxury vehicles had all been legally repossessed. They practically ran across the icy pavement toward me. Patricia threw herself forward, her face streaked with ruined mascara and genuine pathetic desperation. "Olivia, please wait." Patricia wailed, her voice cracking sharply as she lunged forward to grab my arm. I stepped backward, quickly raising my hand to establish a strict physical boundary. "We have absolutely nothing left." Patricia sobbed loudly, ignoring my warning gesture entirely. "The bank took the house. They took the cars. Harrison is facing a severe federal indictment for coordinated insurance fraud. You have to stop this right now. You have to call your high-powered lawyer and drop the lawsuits. We are your family. We share the exact same blood." Harrison dropped heavily to his knees right there on the freezing asphalt. The arrogant corporate executive who had viciously threatened to destroy my medical license was now weeping uncontrollably at my feet. "Olivia, I am begging you," Harrison cried, clasping his bare hands together in the freezing cold. "I am going to federal prison. Jasmine took Leo to her sister's tiny apartment, and I have absolutely zero money for a criminal defense attorney. You have to tell the judge it was all a massive misunderstanding. We are blood. You cannot do this to your own brother." Jasmine stood shivering violently behind them, clutching a cheap canvas purse. She did not look arrogant anymore. The impending felony perjury charges had completely broken her spirit. "Please, Olivia." Jasmine whimpered, her teeth chattering. "I do not want to go to jail. Who will raise Leo? You are a doctor. You save people for a living. Please save us. We will do anything you want." I looked down at the 3 people who had spent my entire existence trying to crush my spirit. They were not apologizing for abusing me. They were not apologizing for violently attacking me while I saved a dying child. They were only crying because they had finally been caught. I did not feel a single drop of sympathy. I felt absolute surgical precision. "Sharing DNA does not give you permission to destroy my life," I stated, my voice echoing coldly off the concrete parking structure. "You made your deliberate choices on that wooden dock, and you made your choices when you tried to extort my medical license for cash." I reached down to my belt and unclipped the heavy black hospital security radio I carried as a senior attending physician. I pressed the communication button, maintaining dead, unblinking eye contact with Patricia. "Command, this is Dr. Olivia at the South Staff exit," I stated clearly. "I have 3 hostile trespassers attempting to physically block my vehicle. They are harassing a medical professional on hospital property. Send an emergency response team immediately and notify local law enforcement." I clipped the radio back onto my belt. "Have a pleasant evening," I said softly. I turned my back, unlocked my car, and drove away. I left them sobbing hysterically on the wet pavement as the bright flashing yellow lights of the hospital security vehicles rapidly closed in on their position. The bright flashing yellow lights of the hospital security vehicles rapidly closed in on their position. I watched through my rearview mirror as Harrison frantically tried to explain himself to the approaching guards. I did not hit the brakes. I drove straight home, leaving them to face the consequences of their relentless harassment. The very next morning, Vincent Cole summoned them to his downtown law firm for one final agonizing meeting. The criminal fraud charges were pending, and my civil lawsuits for defamation were mathematically guaranteed to garnish whatever future wages they managed to earn for the rest of their natural lives. They were backed into a suffocating legal corner with absolutely zero leverage. Vincent sat at the head of the conference table, sliding a single terrifyingly thin contract toward Harrison. It was a settlement agreement. I offered them a highly specific, brutal lifeline to avoid immediate federal prison time for the insurance fraud and perjury. In exchange for dropping the multi-million-dollar civil lawsuits and declining to press individual criminal charges for the physical assault on the dock, they had to pay a steep, highly public price. I did not want their non-existent money. I wanted absolute, undeniable vindication. The terms of the settlement were strict and non-negotiable. Patricia Harrison and Jasmine were legally required to record a joint, unedited, high-definition video confession. They had to look directly into the camera lens and admit that every single word they posted on Facebook was a calculated, malicious lie. They had to confess to framing a licensed medical professional to extort a malpractice insurance settlement. Most importantly, they had to explicitly state that I was an attending trauma physician who successfully performed life-saving cardiopulmonary resuscitation on Leo while they were severely intoxicated and negligent. Furthermore, the contract dictated that this confession video must be permanently pinned to the top of all their active social media profiles. If they ever attempted to delete the video, switch their accounts to private, or utilize a third-party service to obscure the post, the settlement would immediately void. If they breached the contract, Vincent would unleash the full weight of the district attorney upon them without warning. Harrison stared at the legal document, his hands trembling violently. He knew that posting this video would permanently annihilate any microscopic chance he had of ever securing a corporate job again. Patricia covered her mouth, stifling a pathetic sob, as she realized her former elite country club friends would watch her confess to felony extortion in high definition. Jasmine simply stared blankly at the polished mahogany table, completely defeated by her own greed. "You have exactly 60 seconds to sign," Vincent stated with ice-cold precision. "Or I hand this entire case file to the federal prosecutor currently waiting on line 2. Harrison picked up the heavy silver pen. His hand shook so badly, he could barely form the letters of his own name. Patricia wept openly as she signed away her fake elite identity. Jasmine scribbled her signature without looking up. They signed the paperwork, legally binding themselves to a lifetime of digital public humiliation. They had attempted to destroy my medical reputation using the internet. Now the internet would serve as their permanent, inescapable prison. They had attempted to destroy my medical reputation using the internet. Now the internet would serve as their permanent, inescapable prison. Vincent Cole did not allow them to leave his downtown law office until the video confession was completely recorded and uploaded. He set up a high-definition camera right there in the sterile conference room, locking the tripod in place. He handed Harrison, Jasmine, and Patricia a typed, legally binding script. They had to read it perfectly. If they deviated by a single syllable or attempted to roll their eyes, Vincent warned them coldly he would shred the settlement contract and call the federal prosecutor immediately. The recording process was sheer agonizing torture for them. Harrison sat in the center, his expensive suit looking like a straitjacket. Patricia sat to his left, her face a rigid mask of absolute defeat. Jasmine sat on the right, refusing to make eye contact with the camera lens. Harrison cleared his throat and began reading. He stated his full legal name and admitted that he had orchestrated a malicious, entirely fabricated extortion plot. He explicitly stated that his son Leo nearly drowned due to his own severe intoxication and criminal negligence. He confessed that his financial bankruptcy was the sole motivation for targeting my medical malpractice insurance. Jasmine was forced to read the next paragraph. She stared into the lens with hollow eyes and confessed that she had lied under oath to Child Protective Services. She admitted that she had physically assaulted an attending physician who was actively performing cardiopulmonary resuscitation on her dying child. Then came Patricia. The supposed matriarch of elite society had to look directly into the camera and admit that she wrote the viral Facebook post with the explicit intent to commit insurance fraud. She stated clearly and undeniably that Dr. Olivia was a highly skilled trauma physician who acted heroically to save a life, while the rest of the family engaged in reckless, dangerous behavior. Vincent watched the video upload to all of their primary social media accounts. He personally ensured the video was permanently pinned to the top of their feeds and that the privacy settings were locked to public. The reaction was instantaneous and absolutely explosive. The very same community forums and local parenting groups that had called for my medical license to be revoked just days earlier were suddenly hit with the raw, undisputed truth. The outrage flipped direction with terrifying speed. The GoFundMe platform automatically froze their account and began issuing mass refunds to the furious donors. The comment sections flooded with sheer vitriol directed entirely at my family. Elite country club members publicly denounced Patricia, tagging her in scathing posts about her deceit. Corporate executives blocked Harrison on every single networking platform. Jasmine deactivated her mobile phone entirely to escape the relentless barrage of hateful text messages from her former friends. They were completely socially radioactive. I walked out of Vincent Cole's office and stepped into the crisp afternoon air. The burden I had carried for my entire life was completely gone. As I unlocked my car door, my cell phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a direct message from Patricia. She had managed to wait exactly 10 minutes after leaving the law firm before her toxic nature violently resurfaced. I opened the message. It was a long, unhinged block of text dripping with pure venom. Patricia cursed the day I was born. She called me a heartless, cold-blooded monster who had destroyed her family for no reason. She claimed that she would never forgive me, and that I would die entirely alone because nobody could ever love a woman so utterly ruthless. She demanded that I burn in hell for ruining Harrison's life and embarrassing her in front of the entire city. I stood in the parking garage reading the hateful words. 10 years ago, a message like that from my mother would have sent me into a deep, crushing spiral of depression and self-doubt. I would have internalized the abuse and blamed myself for tearing the family apart. But today, standing in the sunlight as a vindicated, successful trauma physician, I felt absolutely nothing. I did not feel angry. I did not feel sad. I just felt a profound sense of closure. I looked at the digital text on my screen, and a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. I pressed my thumb against the screen, hit the delete button, and permanently blocked her number. I proceeded to block Harrison and Jasmine across every single communication platform in existence, but simply blocking their phone numbers was not enough to protect my newfound peace. Pathological narcissists rarely respect digital boundaries, and their desperation made them highly unpredictable. I needed an ironclad, federally enforceable barrier between their toxic chaos and my medical career. I drove straight from the law firm to the county courthouse. I walked through the heavy metal detectors, approached the clerk's office, and filed the extensive paperwork for a permanent, comprehensive order of protection. I was granted an immediate ex parte hearing with a county magistrate. I provided the judge with the mountain of documented evidence we had accumulated over the past month. I submitted the police reports detailing the physical assault on the wooden dock. I submitted the fraudulent medical board complaint that constituted severe professional harassment and attempted extortion. I submitted the certified toxicology reports and the final unhinged text message Patricia had just sent me, proving a continued pattern of malicious hostility and stalking behavior. The magistrate reviewed the staggering pile of evidence, looked up at me with profound professional sympathy, and granted the permanent restraining order without a single moment of hesitation. The legal parameters were strict and unforgiving. Patricia, Harrison, and Jasmine were legally barred from coming within 500 feet of my residence, my vehicle, or my person. Most importantly, the court order explicitly banned them from stepping foot on the campus of Metropolitan General Hospital. If they experienced a medical emergency, they were legally required to utilize a different healthcare facility across town. If they violated any term of the protection order, they would face immediate arrest and mandatory jail time without the possibility of bail. I paid a private process server to deliver the freshly stamped court orders directly to the cheap motel where they were currently staying after their eviction. The physical separation was legally cemented, but the emotional severing was the true victory. I drove back to my apartment and walked through the front door. The space was perfectly quiet and incredibly safe. I placed my keys on the counter, sat down on my living room sofa, and let out a long, steady breath. The invisible chains that had tethered me to their abusive, parasitic demands were entirely broken. I had spent my entire life trying to earn a seat at a table that was built on lies, manipulation, and conditional love. I finally realized that the only way to win their twisted, toxic game was to completely flip the board and walk out of the room. I was no longer the scapegoat. I was no longer the punching bag. I was legally, financially, and emotionally severed from the bloodline that had tried to bury me. I was finally free. That profound sense of freedom fundamentally altered the way I walked through the automatic sliding doors of Metropolitan General Hospital the following morning. The invisible, suffocating weight that had crushed my shoulders for 33 years was entirely gone. I did not just survive the malicious, highly coordinated attack on my existence. I had completely incinerated the threat and paved over the ashes. I swiped my identification badge at the staff entrance, grabbed a fresh cup of dark roast coffee from the cafeteria, and headed straight toward the physician locker room. My pager remained silent. The atmosphere in the hospital had shifted from tense speculation back to the gritty, fast-paced reality of emergency medicine. The horrific circus my biological relatives had brought into my professional sanctuary was officially over. 3 weeks after the final settlement was signed, and the permanent restraining orders were strictly enforced by the county sheriff, I received another piece of certified mail. This envelope did not fill me with dread or send my heart racing into a panicked rhythm. It bore the official embossed gold seal of the State Medical Board. I stood in my quiet, secure apartment and sliced the heavy ivory envelope open with a kitchen knife. I pulled out the formal legal ruling regarding the horrific, fabricated complaint Harrison had filed against my medical license. The State Investigative Committee did not just dismiss my brother's malicious allegations. They completely obliterated them on the official federal record. The written ruling explicitly stated that the complaint was found to be entirely frivolous, factually baseless, and filed with the deliberate malicious intent to commit extortion. The medical board formally commended my rapid, decisive actions on the wooden dock. The state medical director wrote that my immediate adherence to advanced trauma life support protocols under highly hostile, physically dangerous conditions was the sole reason a 4-year-old child survived a catastrophic drowning event. My medical license was not just cleared of all wrongdoing. My professional reputation was officially cemented as exemplary. I framed that formal state ruling and placed it directly on my desk. When I arrived for my next clinical shift, the hospital communication system chimed overhead. The administrative assistant for the executive board requested my immediate presence in the primary boardroom. It was the exact same polished mahogany room where the hospital risk management lawyers had callously attempted to suspend my employment just a month earlier to appease an angry internet mob. I walked down the long, carpeted administrative hallway without a single ounce of fear. I pushed open the heavy oak doors, fully prepared to face the hospital leadership. The chief executive officer was sitting at the head of the table. The 2 corporate lawyers were nowhere to be found. Instead, Dr. Eris Thorne stood confidently near the large window overlooking the city skyline, a proud, distinct smile breaking across his usually stern face. The CEO stood up immediately as I entered the room. He did not look at me with the cold, calculating detachment of a corporate liability manager. He looked at me with profound, undeniable respect. I extended his hand across the mahogany table and offered a sincere, formal apology for the administration's initial reaction to the viral social media campaign. He admitted that the hospital had panicked under the aggressive public relations assault and failed to trust their most dedicated trauma attending. I accepted his handshake, firmly acknowledging the apology while maintaining my strict professional boundaries. Dr. Thorne stepped forward, placing a thick leather-bound portfolio on the table directly in front of me. He explained that emergency medicine requires a unique type of leadership. It requires a physician who does not shatter under catastrophic pressure, someone who can maintain absolute surgical precision when the surrounding environment descends into total, unpredictable chaos. Dr. Thorne stated that my ability to compartmentalize a vicious, personal attack while successfully directing a pediatric resuscitation proved I possessed the exact psychological fortitude required to lead the department. He announced that he was preparing for a gradual transition toward his own retirement over the next 5 years. He needed a second in command who could rule the emergency room with an iron fist and a steady hand. Dr. Thorne formally offered me the position of Deputy Chief of Emergency Medicine. The promotion came with a massive increase in salary, a dedicated private office in the administrative wing, and unilateral executive authority over the entire trauma department staff. I looked down at the gleaming silver nameplate resting on top of the leather portfolio. It was already engraved with my full name and my new executive title. I did not cry. I did not hesitate. I looked Dr. Thorne directly in the eye and accepted the position immediately. I had earned every single letter on that silver plate through a decade of brutal, unrelenting sacrifice. I clipped my new administrative badge to my white coat and walked back down to the chaotic, brightly lit emergency room floor. The heavy double doors of the ambulance bay swung open violently. The paramedics wheeled in a critical multi-vehicle collision victim, shouting vital statistics over the loud hum of the medical machinery. I stepped directly into Trauma Bay 1, pulling on a pair of sterile purple gloves. I commanded the room with absolute unyielding authority. I directed the surgical residents, called for the rapid blood transfusion protocols, and secured the patient's compromised airway with flawless mechanical precision. My mind was completely clear. The toxic, distracting noise of my former family was permanently eradicated from my brain. I was operating at the absolute peak of my professional capability. When the trauma patient was finally stabilized and transferred up to the intensive care unit, I walked out of the bay and headed toward the staff break room to chart my medical notes. I pushed open the door and stopped dead in my tracks. The entire day shift staff was crammed inside the small room. Carla, the veteran triage nurse, was holding a massive chocolate cake. Dave, the burly security guard who had shielded me from Patricia's arrogant demands, was grinning broadly. Dozens of nurses, medical assistants, and surgical residents erupted into loud, genuine applause. They had ordered custom banners and bought sparkling cider to celebrate my promotion to deputy chief. Carla walked over and handed me a slice of cake, pulling me into a fierce, tight hug. "We always knew you were the best doctor in this hospital," she whispered, her voice thick with genuine emotion. "We just wanted to make sure you knew it too." I stood in the center of the cramped, brightly lit break room, surrounded by the beeping of pagers and the smell of harsh antiseptic. I looked at Carla, who had fiercely protected my reputation at the triage desk. I looked at Dave, who had formed a human barricade against my abusers. I looked at Dr. Thorne, who had staked his entire prestigious career on my medical integrity. I looked at the incredible, dedicated people who fought side by side with me in the trenches of human suffering every single day. A profound, crystal-clear realization washed over my entire being. I had spent 33 years desperately chasing the approval of a biological bloodline that viewed me as nothing more than a convenient financial asset and an emotional punching bag. I had believed the toxic lie that family is strictly defined by shared genetics and legal birth certificates. I was completely wrong. Blood is nothing but a biological accident. True family is a deliberate, conscious choice. True family is built on a solid, unbreakable foundation of mutual respect, unwavering loyalty, and shared battles. The people standing in this room did not care about elite country club memberships or fake corporate aesthetics. They cared about saving lives, telling the truth, and protecting their own. When my biological relatives threw me to the wolves, these people became the wolves to defend me. I took a deep breath, looking around the room with a heart full of absolute gratitude. I had lost a toxic, parasitic nightmare, but I had gained an actual family. The war was officially over, and I had won everything that truly mattered. 6 months have passed since that day in the hospital break room. I sometimes drive past the elite country club, where my mother used to reign supreme over her superficial kingdom. I do not feel a single ounce of anger anymore. I do not feel resentment or bitterness. Through the inevitable grapevine of the city, I hear the final pathetic chapters of their lives playing out exactly as the legal system dictated. Patricia currently lives in a cramped, dimly lit apartment on the industrial outskirts of town, utterly and completely isolated. The wealthy, status-obsessed friends. She sacrificed my well-being to impress, abandoned her, the very second her reputation turned legally and socially radioactive. She is a ghost in her own hometown. Harrison works a minimum-wage retail job under a different name. He is legally forced to garnish his own meager wages every single month to pay off the court-ordered restitution and the crushing child support payments. Jasmine filed for a highly aggressive divorce the moment the ink dried on our settlement. She took Leo and fled to another state, desperately trying to rebuild a life completely shattered by the felony perjury she willingly committed just to appease her mother-in-law. Their elite house of cards did not just fall, it burned to the very foundation. I did not lift a single finger to ruin them. I simply held up an unbreakable mirror, and I let the justice system reflect their own ugly, malicious truth right back at them. Society feeds us a very dangerous, pervasive lie from the absolute moment we are born. We are relentlessly conditioned to believe that family is everything. We are told that sharing genetic material creates an unbreakable, sacred contract of loyalty, no matter how much psychological abuse, financial manipulation, or emotional extortion occurs behind closed doors. We are instructed to keep the peace and be the bigger person. That is a toxic, fatal myth designed to keep victims trapped inside their own cages. Sharing DNA does not give anyone the right to use you as a financial asset. It does not give them permission to use you as an emotional punching bag to soothe their own deep-seated insecurities. Blood simply determines your biological starting point in life. It does not dictate your destination, and it certainly does not dictate who gets a seat at your table when you finally build your own empire. For over 30 years, I was designated as the scapegoat. I was the designated failure designed to make the golden child look brighter. I was conditioned to accept scraps of conditional love and expected to be grateful for the abuse. But the fundamental flaw in their design was underestimating my endurance. When you force someone to survive in the dark for decades, you do not make them weak. You forge them into something entirely unbreakable. They thought my silence was submission. They did not realize my silence was surgical observation. I learned their weaknesses while they ignored my strengths. The contrast between my past and my present is staggering. I used to dread holidays waiting for the inevitable insults disguised as jokes, the backhanded compliments and the deliberate exclusions. Now my holidays are spent hosting dinners for my colleagues, the nurses who stood by me, and the friends who know my actual soul. My home is a sanctuary of peace, completely devoid of walking on eggshells. I wake up every single morning with a clear mind and a steady heart. The frantic, exhausting need to prove my value has completely evaporated. When you finally stop trying to impress people who are determined to hate you, you unlock a massive reservoir of energy to invest in yourself. You realize that you were never the problem. You were simply a powerful light shining in a room full of people who preferred the dark. Every single day in the emergency room, I see people fighting desperately for just one more heartbeat, one more hour, one more chance at life. That daily exposure to human mortality reinforces my strict refusal to waste another second of my existence on people who drag me backward. Life is entirely too short to spend it begging for basic human decency from your own parents. You have a finite amount of time on this earth. You owe it to yourself to spend that time surrounded by people who celebrate your presence, not people who tolerate it only when they need a favor.